As Setsuna lay on the ground, he looked at the world around him. Its destruction seemed inevitable, and wondered if humanity had already lost. Vidrak sneered, declaring that all their struggles were in vain. Yet Setsuna refused to accept it was over. With the last of his strength, he launched a simple punch at Vidrak, surprising himself when the attack actually affected the Death God, if only slightly. He was shocked to see that such a low-level close combat punch had worked on Death God, and not even the Death God could disintegrate it. But it was too late. Setsuna's body was failing him, and he knew he wouldn't be able to continue. Vidrak prepared to strike the final blow, taunting him that the playtime was over. Just then, the pendant Setsuna wore began to glow. It reminded him of the gift from his headmaster. His headmaster had once told him that it was the emblem of resurgence, housing the spirit of the tower within it. The pendant would give him a chance to undo a past regret, should he ever have one. Setsuna thought for a moment. He had never regretted anything in his life, so he wasn't sure he'd ever need it. His headmaster, reading his thoughts, had simply smiled and said, as expected of the academy's top graduate, "But remember, there may come a time when he will need this." Setsuna stopped, reminded by his thoughts that his only regret was not taking the path of close combat mage that day. The next time he swore he would surely defeat Vidrak. Suddenly, he found himself back in a familiar classroom, where he had been sleeping. He jolted awake, startled by Leo's hit. Leo told him it was his turn. Setsuna was surprised to see Leo, remembering that he had disappeared before the Death God had come. Looking around, Setsuna realized he was back at the Mage Academy. It seemed as though he had traveled back 10 years in time to the day of his bitter defeat, with the chance to change everything and vanquish the Death God. Leo urged him again, and asking why Setsuna was so preoccupied in the middle of the ritual of choice. Setsuna snapped back to the present and agreed, walking to the front of the class where several teachers, along with the headmaster, were standing. A girl whispered to another that Setsuna was here, and the second girl added that he had an aptitude for multiple paths of magic. The man in front of Setsuna opened a book, emitting a soft light. Setsuna remembered that there were different paths of magic, each with his own unique set of spells. Once a mage chose a path to specialize in, it would be difficult to learn spells from other departments. It was much like trying to believe in two different religions at once. The man in front of him asked him to choose the path in which he wanted to specialize. The man displayed his skill, confidently telling Setsuna that he was sure he would choose it. Setsuna thought for a moment. Normally, he would have chosen a path of ranged magic, which involved creating elements to use mana and fire at opponents. It allowed mages to keep their distance from enemies, minimizing the risk of being attacked, and it could wipe out multiple opponents at once with wide-area spells. He would become the strongest mage if he chose ranged magic, but that wouldn't be enough against the Death God. As Setsuna turned away from the ranged magic option, everyone was shocked. Leo, standing nearby, wondered what he was doing. Surely he was going to pick the ranged magic. They all questioned why Setsuna would choose melee magic, which seemed like the most useless option. The man explained that melee magic focused on strengthening the physical body. It was considered outdated and only effective in close combat. He compared it to someone being attacked by a swarm of arrows, only to have a single rock to protect themselves. He asked Setsuna if he really wanted to destroy his future. Setsuna knew that by choosing melee magic, he was giving up any hope of becoming a renowned mage. However, this was the only magic that might help him defeat the Death God. He couldn't let go of that hope. The room fell silent as everyone watched him choose melee magic. They were shocked, but Setsuna was resolute. With this power, he would defeat the Death God. As Setsuna made his choice, there was a collective gasp of surprise, and the students began to chatter. Silas, the head of the ranged magic department, closed the book with a sigh, commenting that he had planned everything for Setsuna, believing he would choose ranged magic. In doing so, Setsuna would have become the greatest mage and would have brought both fame and glory to Silas as his teacher. Setsuna, however, was unfazed by the murmurs around him. He knew that Silas' plans, while grand, wouldn't matter in the next 10 years. The world had only 10 years left before destruction, and the Death God's first appearance was only 5 years away. Despite possessing all the memories of his past self, Setsuna lacked the experience needed for melee combat. He had no choice but to find a way to master it within the next 5 years. After the ritual was completed, the students were asked to return to their respective departments of magic. Setsuna, unsure of where his classroom was, wondered where he needed to go. He searched for Leo but couldn't find him. He decided to ask a nearby boy for directions, but the boy, accompanied by a girl, brushed him off quickly, mentioning that they were running late. Setsuna observed the others, who were either already moving or ignoring him, whispering among their groups. He realized that the journey ahead wouldn't be an easy one, but he was determined to find his way. A boy nearby commented that the rumors about Setsuna being a prodigy might be wrong and that he was actually a moron. Another boy guessed that Setsuna might just want to be the center of attention, which was why he chose melee magic. Setsuna reflected on how everyone at the academy was acting so differently from before, and he realized it was all because he had chosen melee magic. He decided to check the map, remembering that there was a map of the academy in the central garden. As he walked toward it, he heard someone casting a fireball and quickly realized it was a battle. A girl was defending herself from the attack, dousing the fireball with ease. She then confronted a boy, demanding that he hand over the item her mother had given her. 3 boys were bullying her, with the largest one holding a brooch. He smugly claimed it was an artifact that contained mana. The second boy sneered, saying it was a waste to give it to a commoner like her, and that they would make better use of it. Setsuna quickly understood that the girl was from the melee magic department, and she was fighting against 3 students from the ranged magic department. The leader of the bullies raised his hand mockingly and told the girl that if she wanted the brooch back, she'd have to take it from them using her useless melee magic. He then attacked her again with multiple fireballs. The girl responded by activating her physical boost, a core ability of melee magic, which enhanced her physical abilities. While an enhanced body could help her evade attacks, it would be useless if the opponent was out of range. Undeterred, she then summoned the power saved up by her mother for years to get her the brooch. She asked them if they really expected her to just hand over such a precious item without a fight. She formed a mana blade, and Setsuna immediately recognized what it was. However, he doubted it would be enough to fight back against the 3 of them. The ranged magic department boy mocked her, claiming she was shaking in her boots and wondering if she could even reach him with that short blade. He attacked again with a fireball, forcing her to fall back. He taunted her, saying it was just as he had predicted, she wouldn't even be able to touch them. Then, with a cruel smirk, he released another fireball, asking if that wasn't the perfect analogy for her entire life. As the fireball was about to strike her, Setsuna rushed forward, lifting the girl out of harm's way. He asked if she knew where the melee magic classroom was and if she could show him the way. One of the boys realized it was Setsuna who had stepped in and guessed that he had chosen melee magic as well. The leader boy smirked, saying that it was good news. Now he could crush Setsuna at his leisure. Setsuna stood his ground, calmly stating that he knew melee magic was considered weak, but since he had chosen it for himself, he would find a way to use it. He added that the outcome of a battle wasn't solely dependent on the magic a mage used. The girl, worried for him, begged him to stop, reminding him that they were seniors and he might get hurt. But boy attacked, launching multiple fireballs at him, declaring that it was already too late. Setsuna focused, using his physical boost to concentrate his mana into his legs. He shot forward, dodging the fireballs with incredible speed. He thought that this would be easy, but as he moved, he wondered what would happen if he tried something more. He noticed the boy was only using fireballs, which led him to believe that fire was the only element the boy could control. The boy shouted at him to shut up, angrily questioning how Setsuna was moving so fast. He swore he wouldn't be beaten by Setsuna. The boy, now furious, created an even larger fireball with both hands, preparing to attack with all his power. Setsuna, however, summoned a sword from his mana and slashed through the fireball, leaving the onlookers stunned. The girl, wide-eyed, asked if it was possible to cut through a spell like that. Setsuna explained that a battle between mages ultimately came down to the control of mana. He recalled how, even without a vast mana reserve, his precision in controlling his mana had made him one of the best. He felt the spell had more versatility than he had expected, and wondered what would happen if he combined speed with power. The boy gritted his teeth and declared that he would deliver an even more powerful blow. The fat boy warned him to stop, while the second boy cautioned that if the leader kept this up, an instructor might intervene. The boy ignored them, telling them not to stop him. He began chanting, and while he did, Setsuna rushed in, closing the gap in an instant. With a swift movement, he delivered a powerful mana fist to the boy, knocking him back. The boy stumbled back, and Setsuna clenched his fist, thinking how useful it would be in close combat. One of the boys wondered if melee magic wasn't the weakest magic, and the only difference was that Setsuna was wielding it. How had he become so strong? Setsuna then asked for the brooch back. The fat boy reluctantly handed it over, deciding it was best not to escalate the fight further. The 2 boys then directed the injured one away. Setsuna returned the brooch to the girl, telling her that it was precious to her. She squeezed his hand in gratitude and introduced herself as Layla Rosewell. She greeted him warmly and even extended her hand for a handshake. He introduced himself as they shook hands. She swung it energetically, commenting that she knew he was famous and had an affinity for all paths of magic. Then she asked why he chose melee magic. Setsuna thought for a moment, knowing she wouldn't believe him if he told her the truth. Instead, he asked if she could tell him where their classroom was. Layla wondered if the orientation for new students had already started. They both dashed off toward the location, and Setsuna felt something unfair about it. After all, it was the most remote part of the academy. As they ran, Layla asked if he could teach her the mana blade he used earlier. Setsuna explained that he simply applied his ability to control magic to the technique. He thought that it should be possible to create various combat methods by applying this control in different ways. Since magic disintegration didn't seem to affect that technique, once he honed his skills in melee magic, he should be able to face the Death God. He also had another goal: to prepare for the inevitable invasion of the Death God. His thoughts wandered back to the past, to a moment when he was having tea with the headmaster. The headmaster had removed his gloves to reveal 2 advanced schools of magic, which shocked Setsuna. He learned that the symbol on the headmaster's right hand represented summon magic, but there was also a mysterious symbol on his left hand that Setsuna had never seen before. As Setsuna was about to ask about it, the headmaster replied that he would explain in due time, and that he trusted Setsuna with the secret. But Setsuna never got to learn the truth. The headmaster was assassinated shortly after the Death God's arrival. The culprit was the Death God himself, who had feared the headmaster's abilities. Setsuna believed that if he could uncover the secret of the second path of magic, it might give him the power to change the fate of the world. Layla led him toward a building, saying they had reached their destination. Setsuna pondered how he could catch the headmaster's attention with his melee magic. The instructor was frustratingly critical, even though Setsuna hadn't been late. However, showing up with a girl seemed to have made things worse. As Layla was about to explain the situation, the instructor cut her off, declaring that the days of boasting about Setsuna's good grades were over. Stepping closer, the instructor sneered, reminding Setsuna that he was part of the melee magic division, an outcast in the academy. Annoyed, Setsuna brushed the instructor's hand aside, remarking that it was irritating to listen to him. He questioned why a melee magic instructor would belittle the very path of magic he was supposed to teach. Infuriated, the instructor grabbed Setsuna's collar, demanding to know how he dared to talk back. Setsuna remained unfazed, stating that melee magic held great potential. That was precisely why he had chosen it. The instructor scoffed, wondering how long Setsuna could maintain his arrogance. Turning away, he issued a challenge. If Setsuna truly believed in melee magic, he should prove it. Nearby, students were attempting to break a large stone with their magic. One boy stumbled backward after striking it, realizing it hadn't even left a scratch. The instructor shouted at the class, asking what they were doing. This was their first test to determine their skill level. He explained that inside each rock was a crystal the size of a fish, and their task was to extract it within the time limit. Failure would result in punishment. As the allotted time neared its end, none of the students had even made a dent. One of them complained that the rocks were far too hard, while a girl wondered how they were expected to succeed when they had only just begun learning. Another boy speculated that the instructor was taking out his frustration on them because he hadn't been promoted. The instructor then singled out Setsuna, leading him to the largest rock and challenging him to demonstrate what melee magic was truly capable of. He gave him only 10 minutes. Layla was shocked, pointing out that the rock was even bigger than the others and that 10 minutes wouldn't be nearly enough. The instructor merely smirked and showed the timer, noting that a full minute had already passed while they were talking. Setsuna stepped forward, placing his hand on the rock. The instructor scoffed, asking if he really believed he could do it. Mockingly, he offered extra time if Setsuna begged for forgiveness, but Setsuna simply stated that he will finish it in 10 seconds. The instructor was taken aback, and even Layla urged him not to be ridiculous. The instructor thought to himself, not only was the rock massive, but it was also incredibly dense. Even he would need at least 30 minutes just to make a dent. But Setsuna wasn't backing down. He had only 10 seconds. With a determined look, he summoned a melee weapon into his hand. If he wanted to catch the headmaster's eye, he needed to become the top student in melee magic. Without hesitation, he slashed at the stone, knowing he couldn't waste time on trivialities. After Setsuna struck the stone, nothing happened for a moment. The instructor, Zachary, shouted that he had known it. While Setsuna had potential, he was still just a student. Suddenly, the stone broke into pieces. Setsuna handed the purple stone to the instructor, remarking that he was right about the 10 seconds. The instructor was stunned, and Layla couldn't believe it either. She wondered how Setsuna had managed to extract the stone so effortlessly. The other students were equally amazed, some speculating that Setsuna might be stronger than their instructor. One boy even questioned if Setsuna was more powerful than Zachary himself. However, the instructor dismissed this idea, blaming Setsuna for using some kind of trick, claiming that 10 minutes wouldn't be enough to break such a dense rock. There was no way he had done it fairly. Setsuna responded coolly, saying that if it took Zachary 10 minutes to do it, then maybe he should also attend lessons with the other students. Zachary, visibly angry at the remark, was about to retort when another teacher, Lionel, appeared, grabbing Zachary by the collar. Lionel asked if he was bullying the students. Yawning, Lionel continued, saying that Zachary's antics had actually made him wake up. He clarified that Setsuna hadn't cheated. Instead, he had sensed the flow of mana within the rock and struck it at its weakest point. Lionel scolded Zachary, wondering how an instructor could be so ignorant of such basics. Lionel turned to the students, announcing that Zachary would now demonstrate the mana guard. Taking a battle stance, Lionel remarked that since Zachary was so confident in his training, he was sure the demonstration wouldn't kill him. Zachary, now visibly worried, protested, but Lionel shoved him back, sending him crashing into the building wall some distance away. Setsuna understood that Lionel had broken through Zachary's mana guard with ease, realizing just how formidable Lionel was. Lionel then clapped Setsuna on the back, praising him for his impressive skill. He said that for melee magic, that's more than enough and Setsuna don't need to push himself too hard. Setsuna replied firmly that he don't intend to lose to any other department and he will aim to be the top student and surpass everyone. Lionel chuckled at Setsuna's determination. That's the spirit, he said, wondering if there was a particular spell Setsuna was interested in learning. If so, he would gladly teach it to him. Lionel then thought to himself, recalling a similar mindset in a previous student. He mused that Setsuna might one day represent the department, but for now, he was a rival who could not be underestimated. Introducing himself, Lionel declared he was the head instructor of the melee magic department and he welcomed them all, and today, they were selecting the representative for the upcoming intramural contest. Even though it's early. The intramural contest was a competition between the 8 magical departments, each battling for honor. Every department would select its representative, and these chosen individuals would face off in a tournament-style format. Setsuna remembered that before traveling back in time, he had won the contest for the ranged magic department, earning the headmaster's confidence. This was the reason he wanted to become the representative again. However, Setsuna soon noticed a fortified rock nearby. Lionel informed him that not only had he shown them the crystal, but there was another student who had extracted a similar one, using only his fist. Setsuna realized that both pieces of rock had come from this student, Drago Okard. Drago approached Setsuna, calling out to him and wondering why someone like him, a prodigy, had joined the melee magic department. Setsuna replied that there was a reason he needed to learn it. Drago raised his voice, scoffing at the idea. He asked what Setsuna hoped to accomplish with such a frail body. Drago then revealed that his family had studied melee magic for generations and that he had been under intense physical training for 17 years. He suddenly unleashed his power, causing the ground to tremble as he punched the air with such force that everyone could feel the pressure. With a smug expression, he struck at Setsuna's face, challenging him to a duel. He declared that if Setsuna wanted to become the representative, he would have to prove his strength and determination. Setsuna reminded Drago that the intramural contest was a test of skill, and as the sole student of renown in the melee magic department, he was already a contender. Setsuna agreed to the duel. Before things could escalate further, Lionel stepped in, announcing that the duel would be scheduled 1 week from that day. Drago, not pleased, warned Setsuna not to back out, telling him that if he called himself a melee mage, he should fight honorably. As Drago left, one of the boys wondered who would win the duel, while the girl expressed her confidence in Drago's victory. Layla, however, asked Setsuna if he was sure he could defeat Drago. Setsuna shook his head, thinking that Drago's powerful body, honed through years of training, was far too much for him to handle right now. Still, he left with the belief that there was a way. Layla, puzzled, asked where he was going. Curious, she decided to follow him. They made their way into the forest, stopping in front of a giant tree. Layla still didn't understand what was going on. Setsuna touched the tree, revealing that this was his secret training spot. Whenever he trained here, his strength increased threefold. She mentioned that it was an incredible tree. Setsuna explained that it was the world tree, which had been rooted for millennia. The green light emitted by the tree enveloped Setsuna, accepting him as one of its own, and he too was bathed in the same light. Layla was curious about the light, and Setsuna explained that it was the blessing of the world tree, which had the effect of accelerated recovery for those accepted by it. He believed he had found this place before traveling back in time. With the world tree's blessing, he no longer needed to worry about running out of mana. He could enter different worlds and undergo training that pushed him to his physical limits. Layla was amazed, but she knew that Drago had been a melee mage since birth. She felt a strong desire to repay Setsuna for returning her brooch, so she decided to help him by spying on Drago. The scene shifted to the melee magic training room where a few students, including Drago, were training. Layla walked around observing. Drago was performing exercises with an immense amount of weight. After finishing, he asked Lionel if there were any fortified rocks left. Lionel asked if Drago planned to smash every single one of them. Drago responded that it wasn't about smashing, he was simply borrowing them. He placed a significant amount of weight on his back and began doing push-ups. Layla watched in awe, wondering if Drago was even human. She questioned whether he was truly this strong and wondered if a simple punch would be enough to challenge Setsuna. She researched whether Setsuna could hold his own against Drago. Meanwhile, Setsuna sat under a tree, reading a martial arts manual. Layla approached him, telling him that it wasn't the time to sit and read. Drago was doing push-ups with 5 fortified rocks on his back. Setsuna agreed that Drago was incredible, but he pointed out that such intensity was an appropriate level for physical training. He reassured her that there was no need to worry. It was part of his training. His eyes widened in curiosity. She asked what he meant. Setsuna explained that it was a spell called Physical Bodybuilder, which strengthened the body and allowed for greater control over the nerves by channeling mana. By concentrating mana in their legs, they could increase leg strength. In their fists, they would gain greater power in their strikes, and if focused on their brain, it would enhance memory. He tossed the book aside and told her he had already memorized all the techniques, so he was eager to test them out. He noticed a fallen leaf and with a swift kick, used his power to cut it in half. He even created a sword-like force to slice through the other leaves. Layla marveled at how incredible it was and how quickly he had learned those moves. Setsuna remarked that it wasn't nearly enough, and suddenly, he felt a sharp pain, causing him to drop to his knees. A wound had appeared on his hand. Layla wondered where the wound had come from, but Setsuna assured her that he was fine. Then the green light from the world tree enveloped him, and he explained that with the physical boost, he was intentionally pushing his muscles to their breaking point. He could focus on recovery, which would allow his body to grow stronger and heal faster. The wound healed before their eyes, and Layla asked if he really needed to go that far. Setsuna replied that he couldn't possibly catch up to Drago with normal training methods, since Drago had spent far more time training than he had. With only a week left before the duel, Setsuna was determined to repeat the process 1,000 times. Layla was surprised and asked how he could go through such tough training even once, let alone 1,000 times. Setsuna answered that it wasn't necessary to be perfect, but when he was training, he remembered the days when he couldn't even wield magic. He had dedicated himself to training every day, even when he failed many times. He never gave up on himself and kept growing, improving little by little. He could endure because as long as he knew he was getting better, it was bearable. Afterward, they both continued training together, and during their rest, Layla thought about him. People often said he was born with talent, but in reality, he worked harder than anyone else. Currently, he was lifting an enormous amount of weight while doing push-ups. Finally, the day of the duel arrived. Setsuna stood against Drago in front of the battleground with a large crowd watching them. Drago commented that it was good Setsuna hadn't run away to hide. Setsuna responded that he wouldn't, and he truly wanted to be the representative of the department. Lionel asked if they were both ready, and as they glared at each other, he signaled the duel to begin. Setsuna immediately rushed to attack Drago. Setsuna delivered a left hook to Drago, who blocked it by using his hands as a barrier. Despite the defense, Drago was pushed back from the impact. Setsuna realized that Drago had used the Mala guard to block the attack. Drago quickly retaliated with a punch so powerful that the pressure from it could be felt by the audience, leaving them unable to even see the attack coming. Layla was concerned about Setsuna. As the fog of battle began to clear, it was revealed that Setsuna had effortlessly avoided the punch. The students watching the duel were stunned and wondered if the two of them had really undergone the ritual of the choice only a week ago. Setsuna told Drago that had the punch landed cleanly, he definitely would have taken some damage. Drago, clearly frustrated, threw several more punches. Setsuna blocked and dodged them, which only angered Drago further. Drago growled, asking if defense was all Setsuna could do, taunting him for having such a weak body. Layla felt that the week of training hadn't been enough for Setsuna to defeat Drago. Lionel observed that it seemed like Setsuna was losing the duel from the start. Drago launched another kick towards Setsuna, but Setsuna blocked it once again. Lionel noted that Setsuna was likely using his mana control to parry Drago's attacks. Drago, growing more irritated, snapped that elites like Setsuna always looked down on melee magic. He went on to say that his family had been belittled and humiliated simply because they were known for melee magic. In a surge of anger, Drago conjured a sword, declaring that he would defeat Setsuna for sure. Setsuna responded by summoning his own sword, and the two rushed toward each other, their swords clashing in a powerful strike. Drago followed up with several quick slashes, but Setsuna skillfully jumped and dodged each one. Finally, Setsuna landed a slash of his own, but Drago jumped to attack once again. Setsuna evaded, and the ground beneath them cracked with the force of their clash. As Drago charged again, Setsuna remembered the words of two boys who had criticized him for picking a fight with Drago and for choosing melee magic. Setsuna then told Drago that he understood where he was coming from, but he aimed for something greater. Drago, confused, didn't understand what Setsuna meant. With that, Setsuna broke through Drago's mana sword with a precise strike. Drago was momentarily stunned by the attack, but in the next instant, he retaliated and struck Setsuna once more. Using the physical boost acceleration, Setsuna increased his speed and countered with an attack. Layla realized that Setsuna's attacks were starting to have an effect on Drago. Lionel thought that Drago was performing admirably, but Setsuna's mana manipulation and physical boost were proving to be just as impressive. Lionel couldn't wait to see who would come out on top, knowing that to break through Drago's solid defense, Setsuna would need to create a gap. As Setsuna rushed to attack Drago, Drago conjured another sword, slashing at him in a fit of rage. Sensing the danger, Setsuna swiftly dodged the attack. Drago's strike hit the ground with immense force, shattering it. Seeing this, Drago smirked and confidently declared that Setsuna wouldn't be able to escape on those legs of his. Fueled by fury, he clenched his fists tightly, making Layla wonder what he was planning next. Drago charged forward and punched at Setsuna, but as the punch hits, it turned out to be nothing more than an afterimage of him. The real Setsuna was already in the sky. From above, he explained that by concentrating mana on a specific spot, one could create an afterimage to mislead their opponent. Without wasting another moment, Setsuna moved at incredible speed. As Drago prepared for another attack, Setsuna declared to let's finish this. With that, he unleashed a powerful slash at Drago. The audience was in shock, and Lionel wondered if Setsuna had taken advantage of the movement during the attack. Both of them had been incredibly impressive. Lionel then announced that the match was over and declared Setsuna the winner, as Drago lay on the ground after the final slash. Layla was overjoyed to see this outcome. To everyone's surprise, Drago slowly got back up. The audience gasped, amazed that he could stand after such a devastating blow. It was clear just how strong Drago truly was. However, Drago was furious with Setsuna, thinking he had held back in the final attack to prevent a fatal wound. Setsuna extended his hand to help him up. Drago, still seething with anger, asked him what he was fighting for. Setsuna paused for a moment before answering, saying he fought so that he wouldn't lose to anyone or anything, and that he was going to keep getting stronger. Drago, acknowledging his strength, said, "So that's why he was so strong." He then accepted his defeat. Setsuna replied that Drago had truly been a worthy opponent, and that he believed Drago would surely be a great help in the fight against the Death God. Lionel approached, telling Setsuna that he must have been incredibly determined to face Drago at such close range. He then raised Setsuna's hand, declaring that based on the results of the match, Setsuna would be the representative of the melee magic department. A few days later, Lionel led Setsuna to a room, telling him that he was about to meet the representatives from the other departments. Lionel warned him that he was the last person who should be giving Setsuna advice, but just not to cause any trouble. Setsuna assured him he wouldn't, then entered the room where 7 representatives were waiting. A boy with glasses looked at Setsuna and wondered aloud if the melee magic department would be participating that year as well. He remarked on their shamelessness. Setsuna recognized the boy as Noel, from the enhancement magic department. Noel walked closer, placing his leg over Setsuna's and pressing it down. He taunted, saying they would be rivals in the first match and that in the past 100 years, no melee magic participant had ever won the contest. He suggested that Setsuna should just sit in the corner and lift weights instead. Setsuna, unbothered, replied by moving his leg to press against Noel's, commenting, "Seems like the enhancement magic department has a unique way of greeting others. Was that how it's done here?" Noel grew angry, but Setsuna calmly responded that he don't care about the last 100 years. "I'll be the champion this year." Noel, clearly frustrated, scoffed and told him to just dream on. At that moment, the headmaster entered the room and smiled, commenting, and it was nice to see them both fired up, but save their energy for the real match. As all the representatives stood up to show respect to the headmaster, Setsuna reflected that the headmaster appeared at this moment, just as he had in his past life. The headmaster stood before them, and a pink-haired lady greeted him warmly, saying she would do her best to make the headmaster proud during the intramural contest. Setsuna recognized her as Carol from the summoning magic department. She was cheerful and had proven to be a formidable opponent during the intramural contest she participated in during his past life. Although he had held back then, it didn't mean he should underestimate her now. The headmaster began by congratulating them all for being chosen as representatives of their respective magic departments. He expressed his happiness at seeing the 8 talented students gathered in one room. He then informed them that the matchups for the intramural contest had been determined at random and would take place one-on-one in a tournament format. The first match would be between the melee magic and enhancement magic representatives. The second match would feature the healing magic and raising magic representatives. The third match would pit the formation and summon magic representatives against each other. Finally, the last match would involve the representatives of irregular magic and alchemical magic. The headmaster also mentioned that the contest was an opportunity for them to experience different magical specializations firsthand. The matches would take place in 10 days, giving them time to train and rest. He looked forward to seeing their battles. The students all bowed in agreement. As they did, Setsuna felt this might be his chance to speak with the headmaster. When headmaster started to leave, Setsuna called out to him. The headmaster recognized him as the representative of the melee magic department. Setsuna introduced himself and asked if he could make a request. If he won the contest, would he be allowed to learn about the headmaster's magic? The headmaster, surprised, replied that since Setsuna was a melee magic student and he was a summoner, he didn't think his magic would be much help to him. But Setsuna clarified that he was interested in learning about her second specialization. The headmaster's expression changed, and he became visibly irritated. He rumbled and asked, Where did he heard about that? Setsuna's display of formidable power was evident, and it seemed somewhat suspicious. However, if he was to find a way to defeat the death god, he couldn't afford to back down at this point. He couldn't quite explain why, but if the melee magic department won the contest for the first time in a century, it would change how the world viewed them. What he was asking for in return wasn't too much. The headmaster replied that it didn't seem like Setsuna had any ulterior motives, so he agreed to let him test his abilities if he won the contest. Setsuna bowed to thank him. The headmaster warned him, however, that it wouldn't be easy by any means. Setsuna responded with determination, expressing his intent to win the contest and receive the headmaster's teachings. The headmaster stepped away, appreciating Setsuna's spirit. Later that evening, Setsuna sat alone outside, eating something delicious and reflecting on his 10 years at the academy. He realized that there hadn't been much to do in his spare time during those years. He decided to thank Layla for recommending the meal. Determined to prepare himself the best he could in the 10 days leading up to the contest, he focused on his goal. Suddenly, someone told him there was no need to worry about preparations just before a giant fist came crashing toward him. He blocked the attack with his hand and quickly created distance, only to realize it was a golem. Noel was behind it all, watching from a hidden spot. He observed that it wasn't too bad, but he had used the blind spot of Setsuna to his advantage. Setsuna understood that the golem was created by Noel, who had used his power to turn life into stone. He asked what Noel intended to do next. Noel replied that they should finish what they started earlier and not wait for the official match against a melee mage. He summoned several golems to attack from behind and declared that Setsuna must pay the price for humiliating him. Setsuna calmly responded that Noel had brought this upon himself. As the sound of bells rang, Noel decided to stop, saying that it wouldn't look good for others to see him cornering a weak and defenseless opponent. He dismissed the golems and left, threatening to crush Setsuna even more thoroughly in the upcoming match. Setsuna realized that Noel was very talented, controlling multiple golems at once. However, his attention was drawn to the bread that had fallen during the confrontation, knowing he wouldn't be able to enjoy it now. The next day, in the melee magic department, Lionel addressed the students. He said that before the intramural contest, he would analyze the battle between Drago and Setsuna. He then asked both of them if they had identified their shortcomings. They both nodded in agreement. Lionel asked Drago to go first. Drago replied that his control over both his mana and emotions had been unstable. When Lionel turned to Setsuna, Setsuna answered that his physical strength was lacking, and in terms of strength, Drago had overpowered him. Lionel appreciated their honesty and reminded them that growth was impossible without facing their weaknesses. He encouraged them to focus on those shortcomings during the upcoming match. Layla raised her hand and asked the teacher if the match would also serve as a form of training for the intramural contest. Lionel smiled and replied that it was a good question. He mentioned that Setsuna's first match would be against the enhancement magic department. According to Setsuna, Noel's ability lay in commanding large numbers of golems, and since golems had physical forms, fighting them wouldn't be too different from facing a melee mage. Lionel gave instructions to both students. He told Drago to focus on his speed because in the upcoming match, he would attack Setsuna from multiple directions to simulate a group of golems. As for Setsuna, he was to block Drago's attacks and practice counterattacks. Drago got ready and said that it won't be like last time. Setsuna responded that he was hoping the same. Drago rushed forward to punch Setsuna, but he dodged the attack. Drago wondered if Setsuna thought he would attack from the right, but before he could react, Setsuna was struck with Drago's second hand. Setsuna realized he was a bit too slow. Lionel praised Drago, noting that he had struck a good balance between speed and power. Drago was also praised for his defense, and Lionel instructed him to use footwork to counter Setsuna's movements. Setsuna agreed and stepped back, preparing to punch Drago. After a while, both of them were lying on the ground, exhausted. Drago thanked Setsuna for the match. Lionel approached them and said that their movements were good. He believed that in just a few days, they would be able to handle golems without any trouble. He handed them water bottles, and Setsuna, taking one, said that he won't let his guard down. Lionel observed, noting that Drago had a solid foundation. Setsuna had exceptional instincts, and both were improving quickly. Finally, the day of the contest arrived. The audience was excited, and the host announced this was the 781st intramural contest. Out of the 8 students representing the Academy's magical departments who will reign supreme, both Setsuna and Noel stood in front of each other ready for the match. The host addressed the audience, telling them they could place bets on the contestants. Most of the audience was betting on Noel, and they wondered who would bet on the melee mage. A boy who had previously been beaten by Setsuna approached him and told him that he should win the battle and make sure to show everyone who was really in charge. Meanwhile, the audience noticed Akhtar from the ranged magic department arriving with a man, appearing completely at ease despite his upcoming match. It was clear that the winner of this match would face Akhtar next. The host then announced that the stage would change randomly for each match, and for this one, the stage would be a desert. Noel teased Setsuna, saying seems like luck isn't on his side either. A few kids in the audience cheered for Noel, convinced that Setsuna, being from the melee magic department, would be easy to beat. Another boy expressed how good it felt to be up against the weakest department in the academy. Layla, overhearing the comments, shouted at them to be quiet. She promised that they would see if they still thought the melee department was the weakest after the match. As she raged toward them, Lionel stepped in to calm her down. Finally, the host announced to let the match begin. Noel picked up a stone and asked Setsuna if he knew what it was. Setsuna wondered if it was a piece of fortified rock. Noel confirmed, saying, more precisely, when combined with the sand, it creates golems. As if on cue, a golem made of fortified rock appeared, impervious to blades. Noel then showed a pouch full of the same stones and scattered them around the area. As several golems emerged, Noel told Setsuna that let's see how long he can last. Leela, watching in shock, couldn't believe how many golems Noel had summoned. Noel smugly explained that in the desert, he could create as many golems as he wanted, and Setsuna wouldn't even come close to matching him with melee magic. A boy in the audience said it was obvious what the outcome of the match would be, while another boy next to him mocked Setsuna. Noel then addressed Setsuna, asking if he had any last words. Setsuna replied that it was disappointing. He thought Noel would be better than this. Noel, taken aback by his response, was momentarily stunned before sending the golems to attack. As the golems advanced, a cloud of dust filled the air, and Noel smugly said that it was the price he paid for daring to provoke him. The audience, unable to see through the dust, wondered what was happening. They couldn't make out anything on the ground due to the swirling sand. On the ground, Setsuna focused his mana and began cutting down the golems one by one. He mastered how to demolish those ages ago, he muttered. The audience was shocked, and even Noel seemed stunned by the display. Noel quickly created more golems and sent them charging at Setsuna. Setsuna, however, remained calm as he approached Noel, and in close quarters combat, no other school of magic can beat melee, he said. And in other words, golems with their predictable movements are no match for me. He slashed through the golems again, causing Noel to panic. Noel shouted that he can make more, and Setsuna, don't have to be so ridiculous. But Setsuna continued his advance, finally reaching Noel. Seems luck was not on his side, he said, delivering a punch that sent Noel flying back. A boy in the audience wondered what had just happened, while the woman beside him couldn't see anything due to the dust. The audience stared at the ground, trying to make sense of the match's progress and determine the victor. As the dust cleared, they saw that the winner was Setsuna. Setsuna, breathing heavily, thought to himself he managed to win the first match easily. Layla, filled with joy, cheered for him. A boy, talking with his friends, asked if he heard that correctly. Did the melee mage really win after all these years? Boy with glasses suggested maybe Noel ran out of mana from summoning so many golems. Various students speculated about what had happened, wondering how Setsuna had managed to win. Silas didn't seem happy and said that Noel didn't lose because he made a mistake, but rather because Setsuna was simply more skilled than he was. The student next to him remarked that the battle with a melee magic representative had turned out to be more interesting than expected, but suggested that safeguards should have been put in place. The second battle began, and it was a fierce one. After watching the match, Setsuna approached Layla, and she complimented him, asking if he was going to watch the next match. He replied that he would, explaining that it would help him prepare for the upcoming battles. He knew that the second match was between the Summon Magic and Formation Magic representatives. The host announced that the Summon Magic representative, Carol, had the upper hand, while the Formation Magic representative kept trying to close the distance with his opponent. Watching the battle, Setsuna thought that although the Formation Magic representative was losing, his moves were impressive and could be worth trying out in a battle against melee magic. Layla commented that while the magic being used looked flashy and cool, she still wanted to grow stronger using melee magic. Setsuna then asked why she chose melee magic, as she must have had potential in other schools of magic as well. Layla then shared a childhood incident. She explained that when she was playing with her little brother, they were attacked by a bear. At that moment, she thought they were done for, but a melee mage came to their rescue. She found the mage so cool and strong, and she decided then that she wanted to be like him, to become strong enough to help others in need. She admitted that it sounded childish, and she was a little embarrassed. Setsuna reassured her, stating that it's not childish at all. People can become infinitely stronger when they have a goal in mind. Layla asked if he really believed that, to which he nodded. At that moment, Leo came to meet Setsuna. Setsuna thought that Leo was the most skilled student in the ranged magic department, second only to himself. Leo complimented Setsuna on his match, acknowledging that even though he was from the melee magic department, Setsuna's power was impressive. He then asked who the girl sitting next to Setsuna was. Leo paused as if unsure of his words and asked if they understood each other. Setsuna was confused by Leo's question. Layla answered quickly, saying she was not what they think, and stood up to leave. As she walked away, she wondered if Leo was Setsuna's friend and suggested that they should sit together and enjoy the rest of the matches. Setsuna was left wondering what had happened with her reaction. Leo sat down next to Setsuna, and Setsuna asked him why Actor had become the magic representative of the range department instead of him. Setsuna expressed surprise as Leo was clearly very skilled. Leo's mood shifted and he got a bit sad. He explained that it wasn't an excuse, but Actor was incredibly sneaky. Leo confided that Actor had tricked him into stepping down and taking the role of representative for the department. Leo urged Setsuna to be cautious and not let his guard down when dealing with Actor. Setsuna guessed that Actor was the type to stop at nothing to get what he wanted, so he would have to be careful when facing him. The scene then shifted to Actor, who was looking at a box of flowers with a strange smile on his face. During the tournament, the host announced that the first match of the highly anticipated second round of the intramural contest would be between Arranged Marriage and Melee Magic. On this stage, the moment a competitor falls, not only will they lose the match, they will also face a punishing scoring system. Drago sat next to Lionel, mentioning that it would be difficult for him to even get close to Actar. Lionel commented that Drago would be at a disadvantage in this match as well. Actar, sitting with Silas, remarked on the impressive stage he had prepared for the match. As expected from the head of the Ranged Magic department, Silas added that he would make Setsuna bitterly regret his decision and realize how foolish it was to choose Melee Magic. Actar replied that regret would only be possible if Setsuna even managed to start the match. The host announced that it was nearly time for the match to begin, but Setsuna was still nowhere to be found. If he didn't appear in the next 5 minutes, the Ranged Magic department would automatically win and proceed to the next round. Both Lionel and Drago were shocked by this news. The scene then shifted to 10 minutes earlier in the contestant waiting room. Layla knocked on the door before entering and asked how Setsuna was feeling, concerned about his well-being. He replied that he was fine as usual, and then asked her to look at the vase in front of her. As she did, he explained that it was a magical artifact activated by touch. The moment she came into contact with it, it would absorb a large amount of her mana. Shocked, she wondered why such a dangerous object had been placed there. He told her that it was meant to incapacitate him before the match, marking the 7th attempt on his life. She asked if he was hurt by it, to which he reassured her not to worry as he had taken care of everything. He knew this was the work of Actar, who had been meticulous, leaving no trace that could point back to him. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. 3 children entered, holding a bouquet and asking Layla to deliver it to Setsuna. Layla wondered what the children were doing there. A boy explained that they had been sent by a man to deliver it to him. When they looked around, they realized no one was there. Layla thought it would have been better if Setsuna had received the bouquet himself. The boy mentioned that the person who asked them to deliver it was quite insistent. As one of the children holding the bouquet began to feel dizzy and dropped it, Setsuna noticed marks on her neck that reminded him of something he had seen during the war. He immediately kicked the bouquet away. Leela, alarmed, asked what was wrong. Setsuna explained that the flowers were from a poisonous plant called Venium. The condition of the children didn't seem good, and Setsuna was filled with anger. He muttered to himself in rage about how far some people would go to manipulate relationships. He knew that if the children weren't treated immediately, they wouldn't survive, but he also understood that only a healing mage could properly identify and treat the poison. Leela, equally concerned, said their lives were in danger. Setsuna quickly left, telling her to stay away from the children as well, since being too close could expose her to the poison. Layla assured him she would be fine, then took out a brooch, asking him to trust her. Setsuna realized that it was a magical artifact capable of holding mana. Layla explained that her mother had infused healing spells into the brooch for emergencies like this. She attempted to heal the children, and Setsuna noticed that the marks on their skin were slowly decreasing. Layla mentioned that her mother had given her the brooch for emergencies, though she never imagined it would be used in such a situation. Setsuna nodded in gratitude for her help, then used his powers to move the poisoned bouquet away, vowing to handle the rest. He knew that Venium emitted the most poison when its flowers bloomed and had to be dealt with before the situation worsened. However, if he tried to get rid of it in front of a large crowd, the poison would spread, endangering everyone around. The poison was also affecting him, so he threw the bouquet toward the world tree, hoping it would be destroyed there. With a surge of power, he struck it, cutting off the toxic plant and sending it into the sky, away from the arena. As he watched it burn, he felt the poison begin to dissipate and his strength returned. Meanwhile, in the arena, the crowd was gossiping about Setsuna's absence. Some even assumed that he had fled in fear. Host, checking the time, declared that Setsuna would be disqualified. Just as he was about to announce Actor as the winner, Setsuna appeared, interrupting him and declaring that the match was far from over. Actor gave him a strange smile as he saw Setsuna's arrival. Actor seemed pleased with the gift he had prepared to congratulate Setsuna on winning the first round, claiming it was exactly to his liking. Setsuna, however, pointed out that Actor was using underhanded tactics. Not only had he sent poison to him, but he had also involved innocent children in the plot. Actor feigned ignorance, claiming he had no idea what Setsuna was talking about. Enraged, Setsuna clenched his fists. Actor continued, stating that there was no need to get so upset over something so trivial. In fact, the children would be proud to know that they had played a part in Actor's victory. This only fueled Setsuna's anger further. The host then called for the match to begin. Actor immediately attacked using star-mubulated magic, but Setsuna deftly dodged it. Drago, watching from the sidelines, wondered if something had happened to Setsuna on the way to the arena, as his mana seemed to be in disarray. Setsuna realized that the World Tree had mostly purified his body of the powerful poison, but the residual poison was still preventing his body from working properly. A series of attacks came at him, but Setsuna jumped and dodged them all. Akhtar, clearly just getting started, mocked him, claiming that the representative of the melee magic department only knew to defend himself properly. Silas, watching from the sidelines, whispered to himself that it was good he had arranged everything in Akhtar's favor. Even if Setsuna tried his best, he wouldn't be able to win this match. Setsuna noticed that Layla hadn't arrived yet, and he wondered if the children were okay. Akhtar taunted him, saying he couldn't focus on the battle at hand, and suggested that Setsuna seemed to be tiring. A boy in the audience commented that running away seemed to be the only thing the melee magic representatives could do. Another boy beside him wondered what hope Setsuna had of beating ranged magic. Akhtar attacked again, boasting that he was ready to finish this. Setsuna, determined to block the attack with his mana guard, braced himself. But just as he tried to activate it, his mana guard broke down and he was severely injured. Akhtar laughed, mocking Setsuna's poor condition and calling it a pitiful sight. Setsuna, struggling to stand, asked Akhtar why he had stopped. He questioned when the ranged magic department had ever shown weakness. Why wasn't Akhtar pushing him to his limits and defeating him utterly? Instead, Akhtar was just flapping his gums. Setsuna, despite his injuries, was trying to understand what Akhtar was truly up to. Akhtar smirked, realizing that Setsuna was analyzing his every move, even while defending against his attacks. He found Setsuna interesting and urged him to look around. When Setsuna did, he saw that he was surrounded, trapped on a small piece of land with lava flowing all around him. A boy in the audience shouted that Setsuna was completely trapped. Akhtar declared that he pursued perfection and that Setsuna had acted exactly as he had intended. He prepared to use his storm cannon, saying that now it was all over. Just then, Layla entered the arena and called out to Setsuna. She told him that the children were now safe. Setsuna smiled, relieved, and responded that now he could fight with everything he had. Finally, the preparations were complete. Suddenly, Akhtar noticed a surge of mana from Setsuna and was confused. How had he managed to gather that much mana? Setsuna explained that he had been using physical boosts to activate his cells and detoxify his blood, while Akhtar had been foolishly toying around. He added that Akhtar had only dug his own grave. Enraged, Akhtar retorted that Setsuna was in terrible shape. Silas, observing from the sidelines, urged Akhtar to finish him off, insisting that Setsuna was just bluffing. Akhtar released his attack, but Setsuna knew he was almost out of mana. He was down to just one last strike. Summoning the last of his strength, he deflected Akhtar's attack with his sword. The sudden move shocked both Drago and Akhtar. The attack, redirected by Setsuna, was now heading straight for Akhtar. He nullified his magic and taunted Setsuna that if he really thought Akhtar would just stand there and let him land a hit. Akhtar claimed that the one who would bury themselves today wasn't him, but Setsuna. However, when Akhtar looked around, he realized that Setsuna had already closed the distance between them, sword in hand. Setsuna smirked and told Akhtar that it was he who had underestimated him. Terrified, Akhtar begged for mercy, apologizing profusely, but Setsuna gave him a brutal lash with his sword, knocking him to the ground. Setsuna coldly stated that it was to those children that Akhtar should apologize, not to him. The host announced Setsuna as the winner of the match. However, just as everyone began to cheer, the floor beneath them suddenly began to shift and slide away. Both Setsuna and Akhtar were on the verge of falling, and the crowd gasped in shock. As they were falling, Setsuna realized that Akhtar was already unconscious, and at the rate they were going, he would be in real danger. Using his powers, Setsuna regained his balance and managed to catch Akhtar just before he fell further. He wondered if he was too late. At that moment, Carol appeared and called upon Fenrir, her summoned beast, to save them. Setsuna recognized it as Carol's summoning magic. The audience cheered as Fenrir swooped in to rescue them both. Carol praised Fenrir and with a smile turned to Setsuna, hoping he didn't mind her stepping in. Setsuna thanked her for the help, thinking that Carol was undoubtedly a favorite to win the Intramural contest. She was a formidable opponent, and he knew he would need to prepare thoroughly for their upcoming battle. The audience was still in shock over Setsuna's victory. One boy commented that it couldn't have been sheer luck, while a girl remarked that the outcome was completely unpredictable. The headmaster had also been watching the match. Silas, furious with Akhtar, called him a useless fool and vowed that Setsuna would regret his victory. As Setsuna joined Layla, Drago, and Lionel, Layla expressed her appreciation for him. Drago, having heard about everything that had happened, also complimented Setsuna. Setsuna asked about the children, and Lila reassured him that they were resting in the infirmary and would make a full recovery soon. Setsuna was relieved to hear that the children were fine, as he had been deeply worried about them. Just then, he felt a strange sensation and turned around to check. Layla asked what was wrong, but he replied that it was nothing. He had only sensed a brief moment of intense bloodlust emanating from somewhere, and he wondered what was happening at the academy. Later that evening, Setsuna stood by some rocks in the forest, thinking that he had only 1 week left before the final match. He also recalled the eerie magic he had felt during the tournament and knew he needed to become even stronger. Just then, Lionel appeared, wondering why Setsuna had asked to meet him in such a secluded place. Setsuna replied that there was a spell he was very interested in learning from Lionel, Yagi Lionel's Comet Fist. Lionel chuckled, saying that was what people used to call him, and asked where Setsuna had heard about it. Setsuna clenched his fists, realizing that this was the legendary name he had heard during his time in the Mage army before returning to the past. The Comet Fist was the name of a melee mage who had single-handedly defeated a fearsome dragon with a single blow. However, by the time he joined the army, the mage had already disappeared. It was only an educated guess, but Setsuna was now certain that the department head was, in fact, Lionel. With determination, Setsuna bowed toward him, ready to learn his magic. Lionel explained that the Comet Fist was an ancient technique. Setsuna replied that it didn't matter to him. Lionel was the strongest melee mage he had ever seen. Lionel wondered why Setsuna was so desperate to become stronger. As far as Lionel could tell, Setsuna was already more than capable. Setsuna responded that it wasn't enough. He refused to lose to anyone anymore, even if his opponent was invincible. Lionel laughed, calling Setsuna an interesting boy. He agreed to teach him, but also warned that it wasn't a technique any student should learn just yet. Lionel began to gather mana in his hand, and Setsuna could feel an incredible amount of energy being concentrated. Lionel explained that the technique he was about to demonstrate was called Comet Fist. He hadn't used it more than twice, as it consumed a tremendous amount of mana, but one punch was all he needed. He told Setsuna to watch carefully. With a single punch to the ground, Lionel unleashed so much pressure that the surrounding area was destroyed, sending debris flying in all directions. Setsuna was in awe, remarking that it was beyond anything he had imagined. Lionel explained that the technique required focusing a massive amount of mana into one point, making it difficult to use in one-on-one battles, such as in tournaments. He asked Setsuna if he still wanted to learn it. Setsuna eagerly replied that he was looking forward to it. Lionel agreed to start teaching him and told him to follow him. The scene then shifted to Carol, who was enjoying tea with a man who congratulated her on advancing to the final round. She thanked him, and he asked if she was confident she could defeat the representative from the melee magic department. Carol smiled, not taking him too seriously, and replied that no one knew what the outcome would be, but she was planning to do her best. As the man finished his tea, Carol offered to make him another cup. As she got up to leave and fetch it, the man discreetly pulled out a card and used it on her. He made an emblem appear on the back of her neck, and she collapsed. The man smirked, thinking it would be ideal if Carol could defeat Setsuna. However, if things didn't work out that way, he would simply deal with both of them. Setsuna continued training, wondering if he was ready. Lionel was shocked that Setsuna had perfected it in just a week. He thought it would take him years to master it. Lionel then told Setsuna that he had passed, marking the end of the Comet Fist or Charge Bullet lessons. It was the day of the final match, and the audience had gathered in the arena. The host announced that the final match of the Elmridge Mage Academy's 781st Intramural Contest had arrived. The first contestant was Carol, fresh off her back-to-back victories from the Summoning Magic Department. Her opponent was the one who had shaken up the contest that year, Setsuna from the Melee Magic Department. The students were uncertain about who would win, but a boy was confident that Carol would triumph, as she had dominated every match so far. The girl mentioned that Setsuna was strong too, and after watching his last match, she was fully rooting for him. 3 young children were also cheering for Setsuna. The match would take place at the goddess's ruins, and in anticipation of the fierce intensity of the battle, the Formation Mage had created a powerful barrier around the stage. Layla watched this with Lionel and remarked that it was a fair fight. Lionel wondered about the match as well, and Setsuna glancing at the headmaster and thinking that he should keep his promise to teach him the second magic specialization. Carol stated that it seems Setsuna had thoroughly prepared for this match. She planned to summon Fenrir and challenged Setsuna to give it everything he had. The host announced the start of the long-awaited final match. Carol summoned Fenrir and mounted it, preparing to attack Setsuna. Setsuna leaped to dodge, wondering if the Fenrir's attack was a glacial bomb imbued with snow flurries. Carol remarked that even though he was fast, he wouldn't be able to keep his guard up forever and would regret it. Fenrir attacked again, and Setsuna activated his physical amplifier, boosting his speed tenfold. With his newfound speed, he dodged the attacks and got dangerously close, preparing to slash Fenrir. Layla was happy that it worked. Lionel, however, wasn't sure about it, noting that familiars were just lumps of mana, and Fenrir would quickly recover from any injury. Carol told Setsuna that his efforts weren't bad at all, but now she would use Fenrir's power to freeze the ground. Setsuna was shocked to see that the entire stage was freezing over. He realized that the chill generated by the mana wouldn't be able to pass through the barrier. A man watching from the sidelines stood on the frozen field, thinking that Fenrir's attacks would become much stronger now. He wondered what Setsuna would do next, its eyes flaring with fiery determination. Setsuna realized that normal attacks wouldn't be effective at all, and the longer he dragged out the battle, the greater his disadvantage would become. He decided to use the ruined objects on the ground to leap and dodge, thinking of betting on the charged bullets. He formed a sword from his mana and braced himself as Fenrir's attack struck the stone he had been standing on. A boy watching the match guessed that Setsuna wasn't attacking at all but was only defending. Another boy speculated that Setsuna was no match for a summoning mage. The three kids watching seemed worried for Setsuna as well. As Lionel observed the battle, Layla called out to him asking what was wrong. He replied that it was nothing, but he thinks that since the charged bullet could only be used once after enough mana had been concentrated, it was a difficult technique to use in a one-on-one battle. But with Setsuna's fine control, he was concentrating to gather it in his fist, although it wasn't easy. Carol, meanwhile, thought that she didn't know what Setsuna had up his sleeve, but she couldn't just stand back and watch. She summoned Garuda, a bird familiar, alongside Fenrir. Drago was shocked that Carol had summoned two familiars at once. Lionel remarked that it was incredible talent. Both familiars attacked Setsuna simultaneously, and Layla seemed concerned for him. But Setsuna managed to fend them both off with each hand, making them fall back. He then calmly told Carol that he knew she would play her trump card. Surprised that he had blocked her attack, Carol wondered how he had done it. Setsuna, now preparing to counterattack, noticed a strange man watching from the sidelines. The man suddenly snapped his fingers, and Carol winced in pain, surrounded by a dark aura. Setsuna looked on, alarmed, wondering if this was the magic of the death god. Setsuna felt certain that this was the magic of the death god, but he couldn't fathom how it was even possible. Carol was rambling, then suddenly screamed, unleashing a dark power that caused several dark monsters to appear and attack Setsuna. The audience was stunned, wondering how many familiars Carol had. Lionel realized that this wasn't Carol's magic and shouted for the match to be stopped, demanding that the barrier be dissolved and questioning what the formation mage was doing. The man responsible for the dark magic explained that only the person who had cast the barrier could remove it. Everyone should be looking for the formation mage, but he was already in the clutches of the villain. As the monsters continued to attack Setsuna, he thought to himself that the person responsible for all this must be nearby. Setsuna activated his mana detection to locate the source. The man, however, suggested that Setsuna focus on the battle at hand. He ordered Garuda to attack Setsuna, striking him with a pole and forcing him to fall back. Layla was beside herself with worry as Setsuna struggled to get up. The man gloated that even Setsuna wouldn't be able to find him in the midst of the crowd, and in his current state, Setsuna wouldn't be able to do anything. Lionel felt a growing sense of urgency. There wasn't enough time for Setsuna to prepare another charged bullet, and Carol's physical state was deteriorating. If they didn't act quickly, she would lose control of her magic, putting her life in jeopardy. He realized that someone was controlling her from the shadows. Carol continued to try to escape, urging Setsuna to run away as the dark monsters closed in. He dodged their attacks while making his way toward her, fending off the monsters as he went. When he confronted a horned monster, he grabbed its horns and threw the creature onto the others. The headmaster watched the battle unfold, and Lionel rushed up the stairs, thinking that at this rate, Setsuna would be in serious danger. He knew he had to find the formation mage who had cast the barrier, and he hoped Setsuna could hold on a little longer. Another beast with a long, sharp, single horn charged at Setsuna, stabbing him in the leg. Layla gasped in worry as she saw the injury, and other students voiced their concern. Knowing that Setsuna was pushing himself too far, the man behind the dark magic declared that it was over and ordered the monsters to finish Setsuna off. They charged at him, and Fenrir bit into Setsuna's hand, causing excruciating pain. Setsuna screamed in agony, his voice echoing across the arena. Setsuna then remembered Lionel telling all the students what the most important thing in melee magic was. Drago had answered that it was the power to take down the enemy in one fell swoop. Setsuna continued, explaining that it was about getting close to the enemy while minimizing damage. Lionel had then added that the key was to not let any attack phase them, staying strong and focused enough to deliver the final blow. He instructed them that they would now begin training to defend themselves against damage. Setsuna snapped back to the present, realizing that the defense had been successful. The man observing the battle thought that Setsuna's arm had been destroyed and wondered if he had done it intentionally to concentrate his mana. Setsuna knew the familiars were in an extremely excited state, so any moment of weakness would cause them to pounce on him, seeing him as prey. He yelled that he would finish it with a single punch. and then unleash a charge bullet attack, defeating all of the familiars at once. After the battle, Carol was on the verge of collapsing and Setsuna rushed to her side, confirming that she was fine before gently lowering her to the ground. The audience could hardly believe what they had just witnessed and wondered if Carol had truly collapsed. Finally, the host announced that Setsuna was the winner, marking the first time in 100 years that a melee magic department head had claimed victory. The students erupted in cheers, with one of them commenting on the last techniques Setsuna had used, which they hadn't seen before. Leila and Drago were overjoyed by Setsuna's win. The boy whom Setsuna had saved, the one who had lost to him, said he had expected this outcome and had bet on Setsuna. The boy next to him asked how much he had won. The man replied that he hadn't thought Setsuna would win for real, but he couldn't just stand back and watch. Before anything else, he needed to get rid of the formation mage. The man then noticed something unusual and wondered if someone was praising the formation mage. He used some sort of magic to mark the symbol on the back of the formation mage. Meanwhile, Lionel was heading toward the area as he sensed a strange magical presence. When he arrived, he found that the formation mage had been lying down. Lionel wondered if he had missed something important. At last, the barrier began to disappear and the headmaster descended to the arena, remarking that after summoning so many familiars, it was no surprise that Carol had collapsed. Setsuna was convinced someone had secretly been controlling her. The headmaster examined her and determined that it had been the work of a magical artifact. He assured everyone that they should leave the rest to him. As the headmaster worked to heal Carol, he turned to Setsuna and praised him for proving his strength. He promised that he would keep his word. Setsuna thanked him in return. The headmaster then left, telling Setsuna to meet him in his office the next day. Setsuna made his way to the infirmary, where a lady was healing his wounds. As she bandaged his injuries, she told him that they weren't fully healed yet, so he should take it easy for the time being. He thanked her and changed into fresh clothes. Just then, someone knocked on the door. When Setsuna invited them in, it was Lionel, accompanied by Drago, Layla, and the three young children. Layla immediately asked how Setsuna was doing. Setsuna assured her he was fine and demonstrated by moving his hand, showing he had fully recovered. Layla beamed with happiness and congratulated him again for his victory. Drago, smiling proudly, congratulated Setsuna as well, telling him he was the pride and joy of the melee magic department. The three kids, still excited, told Setsuna they had loved watching him fight earlier and that he was so cool. After the congratulatory exchange, the others began to leave, leaving only Lionel behind with Setsuna. Lionel informed him that the formation mage was fine now and had regained consciousness. Lionel continued, explaining that Carol wasn't doing too well either, but at least she was out of danger for now. Once she had fully recovered, they would be able to learn more about what had happened. However, more importantly, it was clear that someone had deliberately tried to harm Setsuna during the match. Lionel asked if Setsuna had any idea who might be responsible. The scene then shifted to nighttime. A shadowy figure approached a room attempting to open the door. However, he quickly realized that a barrier had been set up to prevent intruders from entering. Despite this, it was useless against him. He simply shattered it with his power and stepped inside. The room he had entered was where Carol lay unconscious. The man muttered to himself that it would be best to get rid of her before dealing with Setsuna. He couldn't allow anyone who knew about him to stay alive. As he released an attack toward Carol, a blade sliced through the attack, cutting it off mid-air. Setsuna stood in front of Carol, his eyes sharp with determination. He said that he knew the culprit would come after her, but he was really hoping it wouldn't be Leo. Leo mentioned that Setsuna finally cottoned on to what was happening, but Setsuna couldn't find any evidence pointing to Leo. Setsuna mentioned that he had a hunch but wasn't certain until just then. He suggested that since they had reached this point, they should step outside for a while. They both started walking outside, and Setsuna knew that he wasn't fully healed yet. If he fought in his current condition, it would be disastrous. Leo asked him to stop frowning and wondered when Setsuna had started suspecting him. Setsuna replied that Leo had suddenly disappeared after the ritual of the choice, which he thought was unusual. It also struck him as strange that Leo wasn't chosen as the representative of the ranged magic department. And no matter what deceptive means Achtar might have used, Setsuna wouldn't have been so easily fooled. Leo guessed that he should have been the department representative after all. Setsuna continued, explaining that when he saw Leo that same night, his suspicions were confirmed. Just as Setsuna had felt during the final match of the intramural contest, he sensed the power of the death god within Leo. Leo wondered about the death god and then stepped closer with a different aura surrounding him. Red lines appeared across his face as he asked that what he know about the death god. Setsuna understood the magic and noticed that Leo's presence had changed. He realized that Leo was likely the henchman of the death god. If that was the case, Setsuna had to stop him, no matter what. Leo asked if they could end their farsome friendship right then and there. He said he wanted to have fun with Setsuna, though it would be a bad experience for Setsuna. With a mana sword in hand, Setsuna rushed to attack Leo, but Leo easily cut his sword in half. It felt like a repeat of something Setsuna had experienced in the past. Leo mentioned that he had earned the trust of the death god and was granted the magic of disintegration, one of his many powers. No matter what magic Setsuna used, it wouldn't be able to touch him. Setsuna tried again, but once again, Leo easily countered his attack. He thought he couldn't just give up. Leo seemed to use disintegration magic only when Setsuna attacked, and then he would move so quickly that it caught Setsuna off guard. He was about to strike Leo from behind, but once again his attack was blocked. Leo smirked and said that it's no use as his sense of perception was sharper than Setsuna. Setsuna determined conjured a fireball and said that it would have been more fun if he weren't injured. Despite the pain, Setsuna managed to steady himself. Leo commented that Setsuna was still quite a tricky opponent, lasting this long with Millie alone. He added that Setsuna would have been much stronger if he had been chosen the ranged magic department. He then acted strangely, asking what he could do as if it was his choice. He said to let's finish it now. Leo attacked with an electric spike, aiming to stab Setsuna in the leg. The pain was excruciating and Setsuna realized that his wound from the final match hadn't fully healed yet. He winced in agony, then asked Leo why he was doing such. Leo replied that there was no particular reason, he was simply tired of the world. It was as if destroying a sandcastle someone else had built. Setsuna wondered why Leo was doing such things. It reminded him of the past, and he shouted that Leo had hurt and killed people for such trivial reasons. He even questioned whether this was really Leo. Leo told him to shut up. As Leo was about to attack again, Setsuna realized that his mana blade wouldn't be enough. He needed an attack powerful enough to overwhelm Leo with a single strike. He recalled his fight with Discord and reminded himself that he couldn't give up yet. Setsuna prepared to strike Leo, but Leo smirked and said it's already too late. Leo released his own attack and Setsuna felt the power of the death god, moving with incredible speed. Just then, a lightning strike intercepted Leo's attack, and another strike hit Leo, though he managed to block it. Setsuna looked up at the roof of the building and saw the headmaster standing there with his familiar dragon. The headmaster asked if he was too late, but Setsuna replied that he had arrived just in time. The headmaster wondered if everything that had happened in the intramural contest had been the work of Leo, and whether he had been keeping an eye on him ever since detecting the impure mana. Leo guessed that the headmaster was the head of the school for a reason. The headmaster had hoped that the culprit wouldn't be one of their own students. In a burst of frustration, the headmaster yelled at Leo to give up. His dragon let out a deafening roar and attacked with the blaze skill. Setsuna could sense the incredible power behind the attack, but Leo remained unharmed. He remarked that it was the white dragon, the most powerful beast one could summon. Had it not been for the power granted to Leo by the demon god, he would have been in real danger. The headmaster understood that Leo was using magic disintegration. He acknowledged that such magic really existed. Setsuna asked if the headmaster knew about magic disintegration. The headmaster explained that according to records passed down through the generations of the Silverlock family, when a mysterious dark force awakened, the world would be plunged into catastrophe. Magic disintegration was a part of that evil power. Leo taunted them, claiming that no magic could touch him, not even the headmasters. He then combined 3 attributes to launch an attack. Setsuna realized that it was a triple attribute combo magic. Leo lifted into the air, gathering power and unleashed it in a devastating spread of energy. The headmaster's eyes widened and he quickly instructed Setsuna to take 2 steps to the right. Setsuna followed the command and narrowly dodged Leo's attack. The headmaster too was dodging the blasts, which made Leo wonder what kind of magic the headmaster was using. The headmaster asked Leo if he was truly shocked, adding that he was the only one who knew how to neutralize such magic. Leo sneered, finding it amusing, and promised to attack with even greater power, challenging the headmaster to dodge it as well. Setsuna realized that this new power was likely the death god's power. Leo threatened that he would wipe them all out. The headmaster sensed that it wasn't just ordinary power. At the rate Leo was attacking, everyone would soon be caught in the crossfire of his magic. He called out to Setsuna, and Setsuna agreed with the headmaster's plan. The headmaster summoned the holy butterfly to spread its wings, and together they soared into the sky with the dragon. Leo watched, a smirk on his face, observing the headmaster's desperate efforts to protect everyone. He pointed toward the white dragon and taunted, "Bring it on." Both sides unleashed their attacks. Leo's attack was so powerful that it collided with the dragon, creating a massive explosion. Leo asked if the headmaster was ready to admit his defeat. The headmaster replied that perhaps it was time for an old man like him to step aside. From the smoke, Setsuna rushed to attack Leo. Leo scoffed, saying it was too bad that Setsuna had been hiding behind the dragon and preparing for his attack. He taunted that all of Setsuna's efforts would be in vain as he created a barrier around himself. Setsuna responded, vowing to make Leo regret the arrogance he had shown them. He reflected that choosing melee magic hadn't been a mistake, and he would prove that with just 1 strike. Leo warned him not to underestimate the power of the demon god, but as Setsuna struck, he broke through Leo's barrier, landing a solid hit. Setsuna poured all of his energy into his speed, breaking through Leo's barrier and causing a massive explosion. The headmaster noted that even with magic disintegration, there was a limit to how quickly it could counter magic. He appreciated Setsuna's determination. Leo was fallen, badly injured. Setsuna realized that by using melee magic, he had outpaced the rate of magic disintegration and defeated Leo. Now, he truly understood that his choice had been the right one. He turned to the headmaster and said that he thought they were out of the woods for now. The headmaster praised him and suggested they tend to his wounds. But just as they spoke, Leo got back up. Setsuna was shocked to see that his attack had not been effective. Leo, though injured, stood tall and prepared to strike back. Leo used his power measuring the moment and then launched an attack at Setsuna. Setsuna tried to block it with his sword, but the weapon shattered and Leo's attack struck him, sending him crashing into a wall. Setsuna struggled as well, wounded, and fell to the ground. Setsuna, weakened and losing consciousness, heard Leo's voice that he can't believe he was still standing. He was such a powerful opponent. Setsuna wondered if Leo had somehow combined ranged magic with magic disintegration, but that couldn't be possible. In his fading thoughts, Setsuna remembered a past moment when he was training to shoot targets. That had been a piece of cake for Leo. He told Leo that he had always been so skilled, and if he hadn't kept up with his practice, Leo would have surpassed him in no time. Leo, amused, replied that it surely feels great to receive a compliment from a prodigy like him. During the war, Leo wondered aloud if he should fire another shot, and this time it would be at Setsuna. He asked Setsuna to look behind him. When Setsuna turned, he saw that everyone else had been injured and were being killed by monsters. Leo criticized Setsuna, saying he didn't deserve to be a hero, that he was a failure because he couldn't save them all. He had abandoned them. With those harsh words echoing in his mind, Setsuna awoke in a bed, heavily injured. Layla was sitting next to him, relieved. She told him how glad she was that he had finally woken up. As he wondered where he was, she explained that he had been brought to the infirmary and that she had been so worried since he had been unconscious for 3 days. Setsuna regretted his helplessness, thinking he hadn't been able to do anything in such a crucial moment. He had been powerless against the demon god's power, just like in his past life. He then asked about the headmaster's condition. Layla replied that the headmaster should be in his office and that she had heard there was a meeting for all the department heads. As Setsuna was getting out of bed, Layla asked where he was going. He dressed quickly, replying that he was going to see the headmaster as he had something to ask. Layla mentioned that he wasn't fully healed yet. He placed a hand on her shoulder and apologized for making her worry, but he needed to see the headmaster immediately. He turned and left the infirmary. The headmaster had just finished a meeting with the other department heads and thanked them all for their assistance. As they were leaving, someone remarked that they would all be quite busy for a while. Silas commented that everything had been made worse by that one kid. Setsuna arrived and opened the door, calling out to the headmaster. The headmaster smiled and said he was glad to see Setsuna back with them. Silas, however, didn't seem too happy to see him. Lionel patted Setsuna on the shoulder, telling him that he had been through a lot. Everyone had been worried about him, but he could catch them up on what happened later. Once they left, Setsuna stood in front of the headmaster, regretting that everything had happened because of him. He raised his hand towards the headmaster, asking what had happened after he lost consciousness. He winced in pain as he did, and the headmaster reminded him not to be too hard on himself. His injuries were still healing. The headmaster continued, explaining that after Setsuna had fainted, Leo had said that, as much as he would like to finish the fight, he had already used up too much mana. He decided to leave it for now, thinking it would be fun to face them again in the future. Leo had then created a passage and vanished, leaving behind a farewell message for the headmaster, saying they would meet again if the opportunity arose. The headmaster thought to himself that although it had been a golden opportunity, what lay beyond the passage was far too dangerous to confront at the moment. They would need to fight with everything they had when the time came. Setsuna sat down, still lost in thought, and mentioned the mysterious entity and the boundary between dimensions, which Headmaster saw as well. Headmaster asked Setsuna if he had any idea of who it might be, and added that he had another question for him. How much did Setsuna actually know? The Headmaster added that since Setsuna even knew about the Headmaster's secret magic, could he now explain what happened so he could trust him fully? Setsuna hesitated, wondering if it was time to tell the truth. Could he convince the Headmaster that he was from the future? The Headmaster asked if there was a reason Setsuna couldn't tell him. Just then, Setsuna had an idea and asked the Headmaster to take a look at the Amulet of Resurgence. The Headmaster, surprised, examined it closely and said it was the blessing of the Spirit of Time, which had disappeared. If it had already been used in a different time, the possibility of time travel seemed likely. Setsuna explained that the Headmaster had figured it out, that Setsuna had traveled from 10 years in the future using the amulet after having lost everything. He then told the Headmaster everything. The Death God would destroy the world, and he, along with his followers, would kill the Headmaster. The Headmaster acknowledged that it was hard to believe, but the amulet's presence made it undeniable. Even though the spirit's power had made it possible for Setsuna to travel through time, the events of the future must have been incredibly shocking for Setsuna to endure, causing him to travel back an entire decade. The headmaster placed a hand on Setsuna's shoulder and said that South had really carried a heavy burden, but now he will help him in any way he can. Setsuna felt a surge of relief and hope. With the headmaster by his side, he felt that he might actually have a fighting chance, and perhaps the world wouldn't fall into ruin after all. The headmaster then said that he would teach Setsuna a second type of magic to use against the death god. He explained that this power wasn't part of the original branches of magic, but rather elemental magic. The headmaster suggested that it would be best for them to relocate for a while to train. Together, they made their way to the World Tree. The headmaster commented that it had been a long time since he had been there. He used to come to train there when he was younger. Setsuna was surprised to hear that. Once at the World Tree, the headmaster explained elemental magic in simple terms. It was a type of magic where the caster uses mana to become one with the elemental spirits, cultivating a powerful force within their body. Because of its unique nature, elemental magic had a different starting point compared to the standard branches of magic, and it could be combined with other forms of magic, making it incredibly versatile and useful. Setsuna wondered if that was really possible. The headmaster replied he supposed he should demonstrate how to use it. As the headmaster was preparing to use his elemental magic, his eyes glowed brightly. Setsuna noticed that the color of his eyes had changed just like when the headmaster had battled Leo. The headmaster then suggested they play rock, paper, and scissors. Confused, Setsuna asked why, and the headmaster explained that since Setsuna was still injured, they couldn't exactly duel right now. He added that they could at least play a game to pass the time. They began playing, and the headmaster won every round, telling Setsuna to try again. They played multiple times, and every time Setsuna lost. Finally, the headmaster explained that the power of elemental magic, Spirit of Time, granted Setsuna foresight, allowing him to see several seconds into the future. He further elaborated that various elemental spirits existed, and depending on the spirit one contracted with, they could gain unique abilities. For example, if one entered into a contract with the spirit of wind, they would be able to fly, and with the spirit of water, they could easily dodge attacks. Setsuna was amazed, realizing that mastering elemental magic could give him the ability to use melee magic in a multitude of ways. The headmaster then revealed that Setsuna wouldn't be able to practice this magic until he entered into a contract with an elemental spirit, and there was a crucial first step to take. Setsuna, curious, asked what the first step was. The headmaster explained that they needed to give it a try right then and there. He used his power to clear his mind and become one with nature. He instructed Setsuna to try feeling the presence of the spirits as they existed everywhere in nature. Setsuna concentrated, thinking about becoming one with nature. He focused on the spirits, hoping they would grant him the power to fight the death god. But nothing happened. He felt nothing. Frustrated, he thought that he couldn't feel a single spirit. The headmaster, noticing his frustration, explained that it seems Setsuna's temperament was working against him. Setsuna wondered what he meant by that. The headmaster explained that in order to become one with nature, Setsuna needed to reach a trance-like state. He needed to empty his mind to truly feel the spirits around him. Setsuna tried to concentrate, but he found it difficult to focus. His mind wandered, thinking of how he was struggling to focus, and all he really wanted was to become stronger. Noticing his distress, the headmaster placed a hand on his shoulder and reassured him, telling him not to rush. He explained that it had taken him 3 whole years to truly feel the nature and connect with the spirits. Setsuna, realizing that the god would make his appearance in 5 years, said they didn't have that much time. The headmaster, still patient, asked what Setsuna meant. Setsuna replied that there was no time to lose. The apostles of the death god could appear at any time, and there was no telling when. The headmaster was surprised by the mention of apostles, so Setsuna explained that, like the death god, they came from a different world and possessed special powers that were different from magic. He added that Leo was undoubtedly one of them. Setsuna recalled that before traveling back in time, he had only managed to fight one apostle. That opponent had been extremely powerful, and even with everything he had, Setsuna had barely managed to defeat them using ranged magic. The headmaster nodded and mentioned that, according to the records of the Silverlock family, there were supposed to be 12 apostles in total. Setsuna acknowledged this, realizing that there were surely others like Leo who wished to bring ruin and destruction to their world. Understanding Setsuna's concern, the headmaster reassured him that there was no need to be so impatient. Fear and anxiety could sometimes invite disaster, and rushing things recklessly could be dangerous. Instead, he proposed a solution: join training in the dungeon. He believed it would be an excellent opportunity for Setsuna to gain valuable insights and strengthen himself. Setsuna was curious about this joint training and asked for more details. The headmaster told him that Lionel would explain everything in detail. The training would be a chance for Setsuna to push beyond his limits, grow stronger, and improve further. However, he also warned that it wouldn't be easy and advised Setsuna to to get enough rest before it began. Leo was released into a dimly lit place that resembled a castle. He apologized for being late and took a step forward. Zagan, the 10th apostle, remarked that Leo had some nerve to make them like it and wondered if Leo was still stuck in his old ways. Puka, the 9th apostle, walked upside down on the ceiling and mentioned that he had heard Leo had messed with the wrong student. He wondered how Leo had managed to get into so much trouble, especially after Bagachi had run away after Leo bested him. Puka asked how Leo planned to clean up his mess. Leo, the 12th apostle, apologized, explaining that he had been having such a great time catching up with an old friend that he had gotten a bit carried away. Zagan, being angered, told him to wipe the grin off his face, as it grated on his nerves. As Zagan and Leo made eye contact, Zagan prepared to attack. However, someone from a distance intervened, telling them that such behavior was foolish, especially for apostles. The man reminded them that they should refrain from any actions that could hinder their god's ambitions, and they surely knew better than that. The man was Satanaksha and the 2nd apostle. He applied pressure to both of them with his power and asked if they had anything further to say. Zagan stopped and, pointing at Leo, asked if Satanaksha planned to deal with the boy who hadn't even managed to finish what he started. He suggested that if it was necessary, he would go and kill the boy himself. Puka, amused, said that if they wanted an assassination, they should leave it to him. He claimed that if he did it, it would be quite a spectacle. Satanaksha responded that it wouldn't be necessary as he had already dealt with it. He added that the person he had asked to handle the situation would take care of it in the end. A few days after the intermediate contest, the scene shifted to a classroom where Setsuna sat with other students at their desks. Layla approached him and asked if he was sure he was fine to attend class. He nodded, explaining that he only had to sit and listen, which wasn't too taxing. Layla pointed out that it had only been a few days since the final match ended, and yet he had gotten himself injured again. She wondered if something was troubling him lately. Setsuna reminded of his conversation with the headmaster, who had said that announcing the existence of the death god and his apostles would be premature at this point. The headmaster had decided to trust a few instructors with this information and would assign them the task of guarding the academy and finding Leo. He also suggested that Setsuna's elemental magic training should be put on hold for the time being. He stopped, pausing to apologize to Layla for asking her to make a herbal remedy for him, but assured her he was fine. He thought to himself that he needed to recover quickly so that he could restart his training. Clenching his fists, he resolved to get better as soon as possible. Layla sat next to him. Lionel approached the board and announced that it seemed everyone was present now. He then spoke about the upcoming interdepartmental joint training. The students wondered what it was about, and Lionel explained that the training would be a collaboration between departments. If the intramural contest had been an opportunity to observe and learn different combat techniques, this training would focus on forming teams with students from various departments to discover and further improve their own abilities. Setsuna thought that with students from other departments involved, the goal was to foster collaboration between them. Lionel then directed the students to the projector, where an image of a one-star underground dungeon appeared. He explained that this dungeon was a replica of the kind they might encounter in real life. Given the risks involved, participants would be selected on a voluntary basis. The training would begin in a week, so they were advised to conserve their strength until then. Setsuna thought about the joint training the headmaster had spoken of, realizing he needed to recover and be in peak condition by then. Later that evening, after class had ended, Setsuna and Layla walked together. She asked him if he wanted to go to dinner, reminding him that he needed to eat a lot to regain his strength for the upcoming training. He wondered what they should have. Other students recognized him as the winner of the intramural contest and as an extremely powerful melee mage. One girl, blushing, told another that she had a huge crush on him ever since the final match. Layla told Setsuna that everyone seemed interested in him now, especially when it wasn't too long ago that they had called him a loser. She agreed with her words, stepping in front of him. 3 boys, one with yellow hair and the other 2 with red hair, walked up to Setsuna. The yellow-haired boys pointed at Setsuna, acknowledging his achievement as the winner of the year's contest. Setsuna asked who the boy was. The red-haired boy introduced the yellow-haired one as Carl, the head of a noble salon. They had heard that Setsuna would be joining the Mage army immediately after graduation. Carl invited Setsuna to his salon and told him to consider it a great honor. Setsuna wondered what the salon was. Carl revealed that it was a social club for mages of noble lineage and certainly not a place for someone like him, a melee mage. However, he would grant Setsuna special permission to join them. Carl believed that having the winner of the intramural contest as a member would surely raise the profile of the salon. The girls at a distance grew excited upon hearing that Setsuna was being recruited into the noble salon. Carl, with a smug expression, told Setsuna that an elite mage like him should be careful about who he associates with. He pointed toward Layla and remarked that if Setsuna spent time with plebs like her, it could hurt his status. Setsuna, however, rejected Carl's offer, leaving the 3 boys shocked. He turned to leave, wondering if one's background was truly so important. He then asked Layla, "Let's go." Carl was enraged by this, and one of the boys remarked that it wasn't something Carl should say to the contest winner. Carl, seething, took out a chain and with fury in his eyes demanded to know how Setsuna dared to insult the nobles. He was about to attack with a blade forged into the chain and rushed towards Setsuna. Setsuna calmly turned his head and saw Layla stepping forward. She stopped Carl, saying that dueling without permission was against the Academy's rules. She then clearly stated that if anyone was being rude here, it was Carl. Carl's attack was halted and he seethed in anger, questioning how a commoner like Layla had the nerve to stop him. The other two boys looked to Carl, concerned if he was alright. Carl reluctantly withdrew his hand from Layla, and the three of them left, with Carl vowing to tell his father about the incident. Layla smiled at Setsuna, and he thought to himself that she was growing as well. Just then, someone else called out to him. He wondered who it could be now. It turned out to be Carol, who waved her hand toward him. He mentioned that he was glad to see her getting better. Carol smiled and replied that it's all thanks to him, that's why she wanted to thank him properly. So she asked him to come to her room for a bit, and she even gets blushed a bit. Layla wondered what was going on. The scene shifted to Carol's room, where Carol welcomed Setsuna, Drago, and Layla, telling them that she was cooking a meal to thank them for saving her life, and that it would take a little while to finish. Setsuna, still feeling uneasy, insisted that she didn't need to do that. Carol reassured him that it was nothing, and if he would wait, the meal would be ready soon. Layla offered to help Carol, pointing out that it would be a lot of work for one person. Carol thanked her for the offer. Layla thought that Carol had only invited Setsuna for the meal, but she couldn't help but imagine something a lot less innocent. Then Drago, confused, asked why he was invited as well. Carol smiled and replied that the more people, the merrier. Carol and Layla headed to the kitchen, where Layla remarked that she had never seen anything like it before. She had no idea there were foods that were good for healing. Carol explained that those were known as recovery foods. Setsuna, looking around the room, thought to himself about what the headmaster had said. Carol had virtually no memories related to Leo, and it could be temporary amnesia due to the shock. But Leo might have been able to enter her memories. While they were thankful that she was okay, Setsuna couldn't shake the feeling that someone might come after her again. Drago asked what Setsuna was thinking so intently about. He noticed that Setsuna sometimes took himself too seriously and suggested he try to relax a bit. Setsuna thought about it, but just then, a loud noise came from the kitchen, sounding almost like an explosion. He anxiously wondered if Carol and Layla were training inside. Drago was surprised as well. Carol then called Drago into the kitchen to help. When he entered, she handed him a tight apron, making him wonder if he really had to wear it. She apologized, explaining that the only apron she had was one meant for maids. They continued making the meal together, and soon it was ready to be served. As Setsuna was about to sit to eat, when Leela mentioned that they had gotten a little carried away and made too much food. Setsuna smiled, saying it all looked great, and since they had worked so hard to cook it for him, he would finish it all. He took a bite, thinking that if he boosted his physical strength by eating well, he could eat as much as he wanted without getting sick. As he kept eating, Layla came over and asked if he wasn't forcing himself to eat. He smiled and reassured her, saying it was all good. He then asked who had made the egg soup, as it had such an amazing umami flavor. Drago, grinning, responded that it seemed like Setsuna enjoyed the food he made and there was still plenty left, so he should just eat up. Setsuna did ask for another bowl. Carol was shocked that her cooking had lost to Drago's cooking. They all continued enjoying the meal, and Setsuna thought it was nice to spend time like this with everyone. It reminded him of the days before he traveled back in time, when he and his friends spent every day together, peacefully and happily. Vidrak had been the one to take that peace away from them, but Setsuna vowed that it wouldn't happen again. He wouldn't lose to Vidrak or anyone else again. The scene shifted to 2 weeks later, on the day of the dungeon joint training. A large number of students were gathered in front of the dungeon gate, chatting excitedly. Drago and Setsuna were among them, and Drago remarked that Setsuna seemed healthier that day. Setsuna replied that he felt great and was a lot better, all thanks to the recovery food Drago had made. He truly appreciated it. Drago assured him that it was no problem, saying it was the least he could do for a friend. He added that the recovery food only worked if they ate it regularly. Setsuna thought to himself that the dungeon training should be a breeze with Drago on his team. He could fully trust and rely on him. Then a boy and a girl approached. The boy asked if Setsuna and Drago had been on the team for long. Drago replied that the seniors had finally arrived. The boy introduced himself as Myfune, a third-year student in the Formation Magic department. He said they would be on the same team for the training. The girl, who had been covering her head, then removed the hood to introduce herself as Yuzuha, and mentioned that she was looking forward to working with them. Drago introduced himself from the Melee Magic department, and Setsuna introduced himself as well. Myfune patted both of them on the shoulder, asking if Setsuna was the winner of this year's intramural contest. He smiled and said it was safe to say they were in good hands, and he was counting on them. As Mifune walked a bit farther, Drago turned to Setsuna and said that Mifune seemed more excited than he expected. Yuzuva added that it was nice to put their juniors at ease like that. Mifune wondered aloud if she thought that way, and he hoped they would appreciate it because he wouldn't be going easy on them from that point on. At that moment, the instructor spoke up, saying it seemed that all the students had arrived and that the interdepartmental training would begin. He introduced himself as Giovanni, the instructor for the session, and also the instructor of the Formation Magic Department. He explained that as everyone was aware, the Formation and Melee departments would be participating together in the training, and today they would be entering the demonic ruins. It was a 1-star class dungeon inhabited by ancient monsters and under creatures, and the students would need to work together to defeat the monsters. Giovanni summoned a bracelet, showing it to the group. He explained that it was time for them to contribute, as their achievements would be recorded in the bracelet's memory. They would earn points whenever they defeated a creature or collected treasures. The team with the highest score would receive a medal from the academy, and if an individual's score exceeded 100 points, they would earn the chance to participate in the Royal Mage Army's field training. The mention of the Royal Mage Army reminded Setsuna of the past, where a group of the kingdom's most powerful mages resided. He had met many comrades in that army. If he were to participate in the field training, he would surely be able to see them all again. Giovanni continued distributing the bracelets to each participant. He reminded them to stay within the areas that were not too dangerous. If they didn't heed his advice, they could encounter monsters far too powerful for them. He also warned them to be especially cautious not to descend to the lowest level of the dungeon. In case of an emergency, they were to channel their mana into the bracelet, which would activate a teleportation spell to bring them back outside. Setsuna had already decided he would aim for 100 points, but then he paused. He and Drago both coincidentally mentioned aiming for 200 points. They exchanged a look, and Drago said that today they could finally attempt it. Setsuna agreed, saying that Drago was right. Giovanni asked if everyone was ready, and then finally they all started heading inside. Setsuna and Drago, however, rushed ahead as the joint training began. Setsuna, running alongside Drago, thought they had reached the demonic ruins, and a 1-star class dungeon and an underground structure built by an ancient civilization, complete with traps and treasure chests still in place. The monsters inhabiting the area would no doubt attack them on sight. Setsuna remarked that even with access to teleportation magic, he had a feeling the training wouldn't be easy for them. Drago suggested looking ahead, as a path had opened before them. They were astonished to find an incredible castle-like structure and marveled at the vast underground space. Setsuna touched an area, wondering if it was part of an ancient plant. It seemed that an ecosystem had developed within the ruins. They recalled the headmaster's words that the training would give them a chance to become one with nature, offering great rewards and valuable insights into elemental magic. He intended to make the most of this opportunity. Other students had arrived as well, and Mifune wondered what the hurry was. Yuzuko pointed out something ahead, and the other students were chattering around them. A group then headed down a path, with the man warning that the other paths were all traps. Mifune remarked that those 4 were fools. In this type of training, they were supposed to take the more difficult path. He then pointed to a different path, saying they should head there. Setsuna thought Mifune wasn't wrong, since their ultimate goal was to accumulate points. Mifune asked if Setsuna was coming, and Setsuna, feeling uneasy, touched a wall, realizing it was a false one. Drago asked what it was. Setsuna explained that the plants growing on the wall were at a different stage of growth compared to others, suggesting there was another space beyond it. Mifune wondered if the growth stages were just a coincidence, but Setsuna disagreed, saying he could hear the wind coming from within. Just as he was about to elaborate, Drago struck the wall to see what lay ahead. Setsuna looked at the new path and suggested they go that way. He and Drago hurried forward, while Mifune commented that they had gained incredible insight, which was certainly impressive. With any luck, they would score a ton of points. As Setsuna and Drago ascended the stairs, a giant ball suddenly came rolling down from above. Setsuna quickly drew his sword to destroy it. Small pieces of rock tumbled down the stairs, forcing Drago and Mifune to dodge from them. Setsuna looked at Drago, wondering if he was raring to go. Drago clenched his fists, eager to prove himself. He said he wanted to make a good impression on everyone and show how powerful melee magic could be. Besides, he couldn't let Setsuna beat him. Suddenly, with a flash, several arrows shot toward them. Setsuna dodged them expertly and then destroyed the source of the arrows. Drago was impressed by Setsuna's incredible reflexes, noting how he always seemed to stay one step ahead of every situation. He remarked that if they dealt with all the traps, the seniors should be able to follow them without issue. Then he spotted a chest. Before they could react, Mifune used magic to open the chest, thanking Drago for his help. He claimed the treasure and earned 15 points. Drago was shocked, realizing that the person who opened the chest would keep the treasure. He swore he wouldn't let Mifune get away with it next time. Setsuna and Drago rushed ahead, but Drago felt something strange along the wall nearby. He struck it to break it open and found another treasure chest. However, before he could touch it, Mifune used his magic to grab it, increasing his score to 30 points while Drago remained at 0. As they continued, Drago encountered a night obstacle. He attacked, cutting off its hands and other parts. But in the end, Mifune arrived to decapitate it and steal 10 points from Setsuna. After some time, Drago finally earned 10 points, while Yuzuha also had 30 points. Mifune, however, had stolen more points from Drago, bringing his total to 55, which left Drago furious. During a brief rest, Mifune told Drago that despite his skill, he lacked awareness of his surroundings. He asked how many points Drago expected to earn with such a mindset. Setsuna, who had 25 points, reflected on the situation. While the rules didn't require party members to divvy up items fairly, he believed that stealing the accomplishments of their juniors was wrong, and that seniors should behave with more integrity. Yuzuha asked Mifune if he had heard that. Mifune scoffed, stating that they were just losers who couldn't fight and were only complaining about the rules. He pointed out that people were there to be taken advantage of, and if they were so upset, why didn't they try to use their skills on him? He claimed that despite their complaints, it seemed they lacked the ability to do so. Setsuna thought to himself that he shouldn't underestimate Mifune. Formation magic, which used magical circles to freely move objects, was convenient and had the advantage of catching opponents off guard. However, it also had its disadvantages. He looked at Yuzuha, wondering why she had been so focused on attacking monsters since earlier. Didn't she care about accumulating points? Could she have an ulterior motive? As they continued, Yuzuha had 50 points, while Mifune led with 80 points. Mifune boasted that after a few more victories, he would have all the points he needed. Setsuna had 35 points and Drago still only had 10. They entered a dimly lit room and Setsuna felt an unsettling presence in the air. In the center of the room, something was placed on a throne. Without hesitation, Mifune used his magic to grab the object. However, as soon as he did, a dark aura emerged from the treasure, leaving Mifune confused. Setsuna immediately realized what was happening. He rushed forward, pulling Mifune away just in time as a powerful beam attack was unleashed from the treasure. A hand emerged from the chest, followed by a monstrous creature. Even though this was only a 1-star class dungeon, the monster's presence and strength felt far more menacing than anything they had encountered so far. Setsuna understood immediately. It was the No-Life King, a monarch of death. He heard the dark fire whisper that it's out, they will trap in nightmare whoever it strikes. The monster growled, wondering who dared to interrupt its sleep, warning that they would pay with their lives. Drago was shocked that the monster could communicate with them. Setsuna quickly warned Drago that it was dangerous and that he would handle it. He told Drago to stay back and let him deal with the monster. Drago, still thinking of the points, wondered aloud how many he would get if he defeated the creature. The monster unleashed an attack towards Mifune, but Setsuna rushed in to intercept it, slashing the attack away. Drago attempted to punch the monster, but the creature conjured a barrier that stopped Drago in his tracks. Drago was shocked. It had cast a magic circle from such a distance. As he stumbled back, he thought to himself that the mana guard had likely saved him from serious harm. The monster, furious, charged at them, declaring that it would finish them off. It cast multiple magic circles simultaneously, and Setsuna thought to himself, with such intelligence and magic, this monster must be at least a 4-star level. All the attacks struck at once, and a magic circle appeared in front of Mifune. Setsuna shouted at him to wake up just as Drago slashed at the magic circle near Mifune, staving him from the attack. Mifune regained his senses, and Drago extended his hand to help him up. Mifune accepted Drago's support to stand, but Setsuna quickly noticed that there were 2 more magic circles forming around Yuzuha. She wasn't moving, just standing still. Setsuna sprang into action, jumping to grab her and pull her out of harm's way. He asked if she was okay, and she nodded, thanking him for asking. Setsuna felt something was off. Yuzuha was acting strangely, but he wondered if he was reading too much into it. Meanwhile, Drago was cutting through the magic circles, clearing the way. Setsuna touched his bracelet and told Drago to use something. Drago understood immediately and replied that he had been thinking the same thing. Mifune, however, had no idea what they were talking about. He figured it was none of his business and only cared about claiming the points and getting out as soon as possible. Drago looked at Mifune and asked if he was really planning to pull the same stunt again. Mifune denied it, claiming that he wouldn't do such a thing to the person who had saved his life. He said he would do the opposite, help them, but only so he could claim the points for himself later. Drago, however, was resolute. He wouldn't let Mifune steal his points this time. Setsuna, meanwhile, reflected on his past fight with Leo in the final blue field. He realized that his charged bullet hadn't been as powerful as it should have been, which had cost him the victory. That experience had taught him how important it was to master the basics before advancing further. Setsuna then recalled his conversation with Lionel, when he and Drago had completed their core training. They had asked Lionel if there was anything else they could do to become even stronger. Lionel sighed as if he had no choice but to tell them and mentioned that it was about time they used something he had been holding onto, magically weighted bands. He explained that by wearing these bands during training, they would build even greater strength. Once they took them off, their physical abilities would increase significantly. However, he specifically warned Setsuna not to overexert himself as he had not fully recovered. He emphasized that this was an old-school, brute force training method, so they needed to use it wisely. Setsuna and Drago had thanked him for the advice, and now in the heat of battle, Setsuna knew it was time to remove the bands they had been wearing since that day. Both he and Drago threw them away. Myfune watched in disbelief. They'd been wearing those things this whole time? The monster conjured another magic circle, preparing to attack. However, with their restrictions removed, both Setsuna and Drago activated their physical boost, rushing toward the monster with incredible speed. They dodged its attacks effortlessly, countering with swift and powerful strikes. Drago launched himself at the monster, aiming a powerful kick, but the creature managed to block it. Drago smirked. That block might have worked earlier, but it's too late now. Before the monster could react, both Setsuna and Drago landed a devastating blow at the same time. Myfune stood in shock. How are they so skilled? A massive explosion erupted, shaking the entire area. When the dust settled, the No-Life King was finally defeated. Their points skyrocketed by 50 each. Drago guessed that the points had been split evenly since they had taken down the monster together. Myfune, still stunned, couldn't believe what he had witnessed. Was this the true extent of their abilities? He had never seen a melee magic student anywhere near as strong as them. Just then, Setsuna turned to call out to Yuzuha, but she was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently. A powerful earthquake shook the dungeon, and cracks started forming beneath their feet. Myfune lost his balance and was about to fall, but Setsuna caught him just in time. Then they noticed something alarming, a swarm of terrifying monsters appearing in the distance. The creatures roared, their eyes filled with rage, and within moments they lunged at the students. Panic spread as the students scrambled to escape. Setsuna's heart pounded. What was happening in this dungeon? As the monsters approached, Setsuna, along with Drago and Myfune, began killing them. Setsuna instructed that they should only focus on the heads of the monsters. While Myfune was eliminating them, he noticed that they weren't gaining any points from the kills. He realized that if Setsuna hadn't figured it out, it would have been the wrong time for them to be fighting these creatures. While killing the zombies, Setsuna deduced that the monsters, revived using dark power, were not granting any points because they continually resurrected. Drago remarked that there was nothing of value in those creatures. Myfune further commented on the unusual appearance of these monsters in a one-star dungeon. Setsuna sensed an aura emanating from below. He asked the others if they could feel the sinister magic rising from beneath. Myfune, unsure, questioned whether Setsuna was sure he wasn't imagining it. Setsuna was certain, believing the source might be Yuzuha. Drago decided to head down first, and Myfune wondered if he should follow. Setsuna replied that it wasn't really a choice, and asked Myfune what he intended to do without them. Myfune felt a little insulted, as if his competence was being questioned. Setsuna then pointed out that Myfune's only skill was to steal points from the juniors before heading downstairs himself. Myfune noticed that the monsters were continuing to appear and remarked that there was nothing he liked about this training. Reluctantly, Myfune followed Setsuna. As he observed Setsuna and Drago battling the monsters, he noted how synchronized they were. He wondered if this was their first time training together. Drago, noticing Myfune's chatter, remarked that Myfune was quite talkative, to which Myfune replied that it was better than listening to the undead groaning. Setsuna continued towards the source of the mana he had sensed earlier. They eventually found the monster responsible and realized it might be the root cause of the dark power. Setsuna identified it as a new type of eyeball monster he hadn't seen before and noted that the magic circle within the dungeon was the source of all this magic. Mifune, sensing that the others didn't understand the best strategy for dungeons, suggested they follow his lead. As Drago stretched out, he accidentally hit Mifune and then apologized for it. Setsuna dealt a decisive blow to the monster, earning 10 points for the kill. Just then, they heard a rumbling sound, and Drago wondered if the undead were heading their way. Setsuna replied that the undead must have realized their source was under attack, and they would likely take care of everything in order to increase their points. Drago, eager to release his stress, was ready to take on the undead. Myfune wondered if both Setsuna and Drago felt no fear, while he, as a student, could only stand and cower. He needed to get 100 points and leave the dungeon as quickly as possible. Setsuna then asked Myfune about Yuzuha. Myfune wasn't sure either, but guessed that she had run away in fear. However, Setsuna was not satisfied with that answer, as Yuzuha didn't seem scared even when they faced the No-Life King. Setsuna had been getting a strange vibe from her. Moreover, there were monsters they had never encountered before in a one-star dungeon, and they exuded dark magic, which was making Setsuna uneasy. Though he might be overthinking it, he suspected that one of the apostles might be behind it all. If that were the case, it would be dangerous for Drago and Myfune to be there. He hoped that Layla and the other students were safe. Drago noticed the undead were heading towards them and suggested they start hunting. He began punching through the undead with Setsuna and Mifune helping him. They were all racking up points, and after finishing off the monsters, Setsuna had 225 points, Drago had 210, while Mifune had 125. Mifune decided it was best to leave. Drago asked if he wasn't going to search for his friend Yuzuha. Mifune explained that their conversation the day before was the first time they had talked, and he had thought she was strange for approaching him and acting friendly. He guessed that she had gotten spooked, ran off, and was now crying and shaking outside. As Mifune was about to leave, Setsuna told Drago that they both needed to look for Yuzuha. Mifune argued that he wasn't being transported out of the dungeon. Setsuna suggested that Mifune walk back, and Mifune's surprise asked if they were kidding him. Despite his reluctance, Mifune followed them. Drago mentioned that it seemed like the transportation spell wasn't working, so something might be wrong with their bracelets. Setsuna once again sensed the sinister magic rising from below. He told Drago he would go ahead and search for Yuzuha, adding that he would be fine wandering on his own. Mifune, shocked, asked if Setsuna had a crush on her. Drago reassured Setsuna, telling him not to worry about him and that he would help look for Yuzuha. Setsuna agreed, reminding Drago to run if he felt any danger. Mifune, still unsure, thought it might be best to return to Giovanni and report everything. After all, there was no guarantee that Yuzuha was even down there. Setsuna told him that while the presence was faint, he could still sense her mana. He suggested that Mifune inform Giovanni of what had happened and to be careful on the way back. Mifune felt annoyed, thinking that Yuzuha had likely run off on her own. It seemed dangerous to continue further, but even more dangerous to try to escape on his own. He felt that everything was going wrong. Drago placed his hand on Mifune's shoulder, urging him, "Let's find Yuzuha and hide together." Mifune agreed, saying that as long as they could leave once they found her, they would be fine. They made their way downstairs, and Mifune wondered how only Setsuna could sense Yuzuha's mana. Setsuna replied that it was because he had practiced sensing mana. Suddenly, Drago stopped, feeling a chill in the air, as if there was hardly any oxygen left. They paused and listened carefully, hearing a sound. Setsuna pointed in the direction the sound had come from. Drago moved ahead, mentioning that someone was there. Mifune wondered aloud if it was Yuzuha. To their relief, it was indeed Yuzuha, sitting inside a dark magic circle. Half of her body was being absorbed into the circle, and she was pleading for help. Mifune closed his eyes, wondering what had happened to Yuzuha. Setsuna told Drago not to get any closer, explaining that she had been caught in an ancient trap. He pointed out that there were no traces of the trap having been activated in the dungeon, and he suspected that Yuzuha had used an item imbued with dark magic. He believed it was the same kind of item his friend had found on the black market before he traveled back in time. Setsuna was certain that Yuzuha hadn't used it knowingly, which meant someone had laid a trap for her. He explained that the trap could only be disarmed with a specific spell, and they needed a weapon imbued with that spell to destroy it. Determined, Setsuna tried to break the trap and managed to pull Yuzuha out of the magic circle. She collapsed into his arms as he whispered for her to hold on. He realized the magic was coming from the earring she was wearing. Mifune wondered what had happened after she disappeared and if there was any way to fix it. Setsuna lifted her onto his back, saying they needed to watch over her. He was relieved they had found her before things could get worse and promised to explain everything to Giovanni later. He was certain that everything happening here was due to the Apostles' influence. Drago stood, observing how strange everything was, but reminded them that their priority was to escape with Yuzuha. Setsuna asked Mifune to try using the transportation spell again. Mifune gave it a try, but found it wasn't working. He wondered aloud if Giovanni had given him a defective one. Setsuna then tried Yuzuha's bracelet, but discovered that it wasn't working either. Drago suggested they leave before things got worse. Just then, a rumbling sound shook the ground, and they wondered if it was an earthquake. They needed to leave quickly. Drago told both of them to follow closely behind him. Mifune thought there was never a dull moment in this cursed dungeon. Suddenly, rocks began to fall in their path, and Drago urged Mifune to hurry. But it was already too late. The debris had completely blocked their way out. Setsuna suggested they take a safer route instead. Meanwhile, Layla and her party were moving through the dungeon, calling out to see if anyone was nearby. They heard someone cry out for help and discovered an injured boy pinned under the rocks. They quickly helped him out, and Layla used healing magic to stabilize him. The boy, still hurt, wondered if anyone else was trapped under the rocks. The injured boy told them there was one more person behind the debris. Layla hoped that Setsuna and Drago were okay, and that they would be able to find them soon. Meanwhile, Setsuna and his party were sitting near the fallen rocks, with Drago wondering if they couldn't use a charged bullet to break through the debris. Setsuna replied that it would be dangerous to use a charged bullet as it might trigger another earthquake. Drago said they had a decent chance of getting out once the rocks were cleared. Setsuna agreed, but cautioned that they had to be careful due to the lack of oxygen. As Drago pondered a solution, Setsuna said there was a way, but they would need to go deeper into the dungeon to make it happen. However, they couldn't do it with Mifune and Yuzuha in their current state. Since it would be difficult to carry both of them, Setsuna decided to go down alone and investigate. Mifune wondered if Setsuna had some sort of trick up his sleeve. He knew that Setsuna was incredibly strong, but there might be even more powerful monsters deeper down. He hesitated, not wanting Setsuna to risk his life. Setsuna wasn't sure, but he speculated that the earthquake was a result of the dungeon waking up. The failure of the transportation spell was likely due to the immense mana surrounding them, making the place no longer a one-star dungeon. Drago commented that Setsuna was sharp, having figured out what was going on almost immediately. Setsuna believed it was because he had experienced something similar before when he traveled back in time. Mifune told Drago to stay behind, wishing Setsuna good luck. Setsuna reassured them, saying, "Don't worry, I'll be fine," and asked Drago to mark the spot they passed through. He then left, promising to find a way out of the dungeon. As Setsuna made his way deeper into the dungeon, he wondered if he would be able to defeat the dungeon's boss with only melee magic. If he could use fire or purification magic, it would have been much easier to deal with the undead. Melee magic mainly relied on physical attacks, and its major drawback was the difficulty in performing elemental magic. However, for some reason, he felt a vast, swirling power inside him. Meanwhile, Drago was clearing the rocks, and Mifune, observing him, reflected that he had once thought winning the contest in the melee magic department was a fluke, but now seeing Drago's strength, he realized it wasn't the case. Both Drago and Setsuna had been training hard, while he had resorted to dirty tricks. He felt like a fool. Drago, encouraging him to stay strong, reassured Mifune that they would make it out. Suddenly, they heard a voice asking if anyone was there. Drago responded, confirming the sound. On the other side of the debris, Layla's team was also searching for survivors. A boy from Layla's group said he heard the sound of someone moving. Layla, curious, wondered if it was Drago and called out, asking if it was really him and where Setsuna was. Drago replied that they were there, but Setsuna had gone off to find another exit. Layla, eager to help, asked if they could assist in moving the rocks. As Setsuna walked down the stairs, he felt that the air was growing thicker and heavier, signaling that he must be nearing the center of the dungeon. He spotted a gate and wondered if it led to the exit, but the presence of the dungeon boss made him cautious. He found it strange that a place filled with such dark energy was so empty, making him stay on high alert. From above, two pairs of eyes watched him intently. Suddenly, a monster lunged at him, but he swiftly jumped to dodge the attack, trying to make sense of what it was. As he observed it closely, he realized it had two heads, confirming that it was a two-headed Hydra. Setsuna understood what was causing the chaos in the dungeon. The signs of decomposition on several parts of the Hydra's body suggested it had been forcibly resurrected. The only power capable of such a feat was Vidrak. The Hydra released a poisonous gas, and Setsuna jumped back to avoid it, thinking it would be too dangerous to remain too close for long. If he didn't deal with it soon, things in the dungeon would only get worse. He inhaled a breath of fresh air, reminding himself that he needed to defeat the Hydra as quickly as possible. He charged forward, slashing at it with his weapons. Even after multiple strikes, he rushed to the back of the creature, remembering his past fight with the Hydra. He recalled that it hadn't died until its heads were severed, so he focused on targeting one head at a time. He realized that his attacks weren't very effective against its tough skull, so he aimed for the weakest point, determined to cut down at least one head. The Hydra's second head attacked him with acid, and although Setsuna dodged, some of it splashed onto his clothes, causing them to melt. He thought that if the acid had hit him directly, his body wouldn't have survived. Suddenly, the second head regenerated, and he realized that the Hydra had regenerative abilities similar to those of the undead. The battle would never end if he kept cutting one head at a time. He needed to take both heads down at once. With his ranged magic, he could have cast spell after spell and easily won, but he wanted to test a technique he had been training in. He remembered the time when he was unable to perform it, but then Lionel had come to him, asking if he was practicing dual wielding. It had been impressive for a forest student to attempt such a technique, but it seemed that Setsuna's body wasn't able to execute what he had visualized in his mind. Lionel had explained how difficult it was, and that first they needed to master controlling the mana within their bodies. Setsuna reflected on how important it was to command his mana. He had been thinking of his body as it was before he traveled back in time, but he realized that his current body was different. Thanks to continuing his basic training while recovering, he had become quite good at controlling his mana. But this was the first time he was attempting the technique since that day. He focused, thinking that he had to first grab the sword he was most familiar with and then draw the second sword to attack. He tried, but his blade felt weak. Just as he was in the air, the Hydra's tail struck him, slamming him against the wall. However, he managed to regain his balance and prepared to try again. He realized it was using up far more mana than he had expected. Once again, the Hydra attacked him with acid, but he moved quickly, thinking that if it slowed him down, he'd be in real danger. If he got hit again, he knew his body wouldn't survive it, and he couldn't afford to die like that. He took a step back, thinking that this was his last chance. He inhaled a deep breath, focusing all of his energy, reminding himself that he couldn't lose focus now. He made the Hydra strike against the wall and then jumped, using both swords to unleash a flurry of slashes. After a series of attacks, the Hydra's heads finally fell. As Setsuna had suspected, it couldn't survive losing both heads and must have reached its limit for regeneration. He looked at his injured hand, thinking that his dual blade technique still wasn't perfect. He'd need to keep training if he wanted to use it comfortably. Giovanni suddenly appeared, clapping, and commented that defeating his creation using only melee magic was impressive. He guessed that Setsuna really had bested Leah that night. Setsuna turned toward Giovanni. Giovanni remarked that Setsuna didn't seem nearly as surprised as he had expected, almost as though he had been anticipating his arrival. Setsuna replied that it wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and he was always prepared for any possibility. Giovanni acknowledged his attitude, noting that those with limited perspectives couldn't survive the battlefield, but Setsuna possessed both exceptional combat skills and a sharp intellect. Setsuna then asked 2 questions: if Giovanni was one of the apostles and why he was doing this. Giovanni responded that after watching Setsuna fight in the intramural contest, he had only one thought: what a fine specimen. He wanted to get his hands on Setsuna's corpse and turn him into an undead puppet, just like Yuzuha. Setsuna realized that Giovanni was behind Yuzuha's transformation. Giovanni explained that Yuzuha had eagerly volunteered to serve as his guide. He had high expectations for her, but she had been irritating, constantly approaching him needlessly and taking his earrings without any suspicion. A fool like her should consider it an honor to be turned into an undead, Giovanni claimed. Setsuna clenched his fists, his anger rising. Enough. Stop, he shouted. He vowed to make Giovanni pay for everything he had done. The other students were exhausted from moving the rocks and complained that they couldn't lift anymore. Finally, Drago was able to see Layla and was overjoyed. She was glad that he was okay. Drago thanked everyone for their hard work and said they just needed to find their way out of the dungeon. Layla mentioned that she had no idea where they were, but she also noted that the earthquake had stopped and the red light was now much fainter. Drago guessed that Setsuna had defeated the dungeon's boss monster. Myfume then pointed out that the bracelet was reacting to his magic. When Layla saw it as well, she suggested they head up and find a place where teleportation would work. Drago asked Layla if she could take charge as Setsuna hadn't returned yet. He needed to go down and check on Setsuna. Layla agreed and said they would wait for both of them outside. Drago thanked her and left. Meanwhile, Setsuna was enraged with Giovanni and vowed that he would make him pay for what he had done. Giovanni replied that it was easier said than done. Enraged, Setsuna attempted to punch Giovanni, but Giovanni used Frost Phantom to turn himself into ice, and Setsuna's punch shattered the ice. Setsuna was taken aback by the sight and suddenly felt a sharp piece of ice strike him. Giovanni stood at a distance, commenting that melee magic was a crude and inefficient branch of magic, only useful in hand-to-hand combat. He mocked Setsuna, saying that he didn't think Giovanni would simply take a hit from such a pathetic attack. Setsuna realized that Giovanni was the type to trick his opponents and strike when they were caught off guard. He also understood that he had already expended a lot of mana fighting the Hydra and needed to finish the fight quickly before he ran out of energy. He rushed forward, thinking that Giovanni's magic worked much like the formation magic Myfume used. There must be some kind of mechanism tied to the way he teleported. As Setsuna prepared to strike again, the same ice reappeared to block him. He looked back and noticed a magic circle forming at the spot where Giovanni had teleported. Another ice attack struck, and Setsuna realized his body was sluggish from the poison he had taken earlier. After the attack, Giovanni mocked him, saying it was getting sad and asking why Setsuna didn't just quit while he was ahead. Setsuna shouted at him to shut up, vowing that he would never forgive Giovanni for what he had done and that he would undo the curse he had placed on Yuzuha. Giovanni responded, commenting that Setsuna seemed to know exactly how to break the curse. Giovanni couldn't understand why Setsuna was so concerned about Yuzuha, but he explained that it was her reward for successfully luring him there. He added that if Setsuna still wanted to undo the curse despite that, he had a suggestion. Giovanni grabbed Setsuna's hair and pulled it, telling him to simply pledge his loyalty to Giovanni. Setsuna, enraged, refused and slashed at Giovanni once more. However, Giovanni appeared a little farther away and Setsuna rushed forward to attack him. Giovanni realized that Setsuna had figured out his magic. Setsuna's strike severed Giovanni's arms, but Giovanni remained calm, commenting that Setsuna was a quick learner. He regenerated his arms and stated that he must add Setsuna to his undead collection, though it seemed there was still much he needed to teach him. Setsuna then realized that Giovanni was also undead. Giovanni confirmed this, explaining that he was on the verge of death when Vidrak appeared and granted him the power of immortality. Giovanni was reborn as Vidrak's ultimate masterpiece. He regarded humans as feeble creatures who aged and crumbled to dust far too easily, which he found pitiful. Giovanni believed it was his mission to present them with true happiness by giving those who deserved it an immortal body. He taunted Setsuna, saying that since he no longer had the strength to fight, he might as well surrender. Setsuna felt weak and his head grew fuzzy. He knew he had to find a way to defeat Giovanni. Just as he felt his strength waning, he sensed someone's presence. Someone was coming. Giovanni began to chant dark magic beneath Setsuna, telling him that he was speechless. Finally, Setsuna realized the situation he was in. Giovanni was about to start the ritual. But just as Giovanni began his chant, Drago appeared, throwing a stone at Giovanni from a distance. Seizing the opportunity, Setsuna punched Giovanni. The same ice magic appeared, but this time Setsuna felt things starting to work in his favor. He quickly jumped away from the magic circle just as a sharp piece of ice shot toward him. Drago asked if Setsuna was okay. Setsuna replied that Drago was like his lifesaver. Drago noticed Setsuna's injuries, but Setsuna assured him that he was fine and could still fight. He then asked about Mifune and Yuzuva. Drago explained that everyone was heading up out of the dungeon and that Layla and the other teams had met them at the upper levels of the dungeon. Setsuna thought that if it was Layla, then he was sure they would be fine. Giovanni, on the other hand, wondered who dared to interrupt his ritual, clearly not expecting Drago. Drago asked if Giovanni was the one behind everything. Setsuna confirmed, telling Drago that Giovanni was responsible for everything happening in the dungeon and that they needed to stop his rampage immediately. Drago furiously remarked that it was unforgivable for Giovanni to have been posing as an instructor all this time. Setsuna quickly explained Giovanni's fighting pattern to Drago, advising that they needed to be quick in dodging his attacks. When Giovanni teleported, they should strike, as he couldn't cast teleportation continuously. Drago needed to attack first, and Setsuna would follow the same pattern and finish Giovanni off. Setsuna noted that Giovanni's ability had slowed significantly, so one more attack should be enough. Drago agreed to give it a try. Giovanni cursed the interruption and called them irritating fools. As Drago attacked, ice magic shattered and Giovanni appeared at his teleportation spot. He warned them not to underestimate his magic, boasting that he could also cast frostbite. Setsuna took the opportunity to punch Giovanni, thinking he would finish him off. He landed several punches, forcing Giovanni into the wall, where he collapsed, badly injured. Setsuna, already exhausted and on the brink of his limit, collapsed and fainted shortly afterward. Giovanni, barely able to move, muttered that it was the last place he expected to use the item Vidrak had bestowed upon him. He then pulled something from his body, thinking of the Hydra and preparing to combine it with himself. He turned to Drago, declaring that it wasn't over yet. Drago stared in shock as Giovanni began to transform, turning into a monstrous creature. Giovanni sneered, calling Setsuna and Drago arrogant kids who had forced his hand. He claimed he had no other choice but to use the item Vidrak had given him to deal with them, and he promised they would regret it. Setsuna hadn't completely fainted, but he realized that if nothing was done, Giovanni would do whatever he wanted. Now Setsuna also felt himself on the verge of losing consciousness. Then he saw a flare and recalled the headmaster's teachings about elemental magic, how it worked and what it was. Setsuna thought that this situation resembled the trance-like state the headmaster had described. He could now feel the spirit energy around him. He reached out toward the flare, hoping the spirit would lend him its strength to help save everyone. Suddenly, the spirit contacted him, telling him to stop causing such a fuss. Setsuna's surroundings began to shift, and he saw stones floating in the air. The atmosphere was completely different from the dungeon. He wondered if he had been transported to a different place altogether. Turning around, he saw a giant spirit surrounded by flares. He wondered if he had been transported to a different place. The spirit was not only a massive physical entity, but large enough to swallow Setsuna whole, with a mana aura that was extremely aggressive. His presence was overwhelming just standing before it. Setsuna confronted the spirit, asking if it would listen to his story. He explained that Vidrak and his subordinates were terrorizing humans in the mortal realm, and his friends were in grave danger. He pleaded for the spirit's help. The spirit, however, was not pleased with his impertinence. The ground beneath Setsuna suddenly getting destroyed. Flares around the spirit flared up. Despite being far away, it felt as though his body was being set on fire. The spirit decided to listen, but only to hear Setsuna speak without understanding his place. The spirit wonders why he should care about any of that before causing 4 stones to rise and surround Setsuna. Setsuna asked if the spirit was truly unwilling to help him. The spirit replied coldly, stating that it had no interest in listening to Setsuna's sob story. The flares on the stones intensified, capturing Setsuna in a fiery grip. The flames surrounding him were incredibly powerful. The spirit mocked him, saying that the area had once been cool, but now it would become an infernal blessing, reducing Setsuna to ashes. Setsuna knew that if he gave up, he was done for. He had to find a way to communicate with the spirit. The spirit realized he was still conscious, something that would have been impossible for a normal human who would have succumbed long ago. Then, Spirit sensed the presence of the spirit of time within Setsuna. Setsuna screamed and pleaded with the spirit to hear him out. The spirit, noticing that Setsuna was still trying to resist, found him troublesome. He was hardly the one to deal with such a foul monster from another world and its pesky underlings. Setsuna thought about the other world and wondered if the spirit knew about Vidrak. Then Setsuna shouted that he would definitely defeat them, which was why he was asking the spirit to lend him its power. The spirit intensified its flare, saying that defeating them was beyond Setsuna's capabilities. No matter how much he struggled, he would be trapped in the infinitely flowing space, immune to spend eternity in the flames. Setsuna retorted that he didn't care and would never back down. The spirit paused, asking him to prove it, and then unleashed hellfire upon him. Setsuna felt excruciating pain as his body burned, unable to breathe. He couldn't feel anything anymore, but he refused to pass out. He wondered if Drago was okay and what was happening in the dungeon. What was Drago doing there? It was too early to give up, not when he hadn't yet defeated Vidrak. Then Setsuna gathered his strength and asked the spirit to lend him its power so he could save everyone from Vidrak's clutches. The spirit, incredulous, commented that it was unbelievable. No human could withstand such flames, yet Setsuna desperately wished to protect the people outside. The spirit noticed that Setsuna was still standing his ground even after losing consciousness. He found this to be entertaining. The spirit then told him to get out of his sight and go teach the villains a lesson. Finally, Setsuna received the power of the spirit. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Drago was feeling a strange sense of satisfaction, thinking that his mana guard hadn't fully blocked the ice magic. Giovanni remarked that it was impressive that a mere human had lasted so long, driven by his pride as a melee magician. However, Drago's struggles were futile, and Giovanni smirked as he grabbed Drago by the collar. Drago felt his senses dulling from the earlier attack. Giovanni declared that he would finish Drago off in one blow, along with the friends he was trying to save. He would cut them both into pieces. He then hurled Drago into the wall. Drago realized he couldn't use Mana Guard anymore and had no other techniques left to defend against Giovanni's attack. He thought back to his parents, remembering how his father had praised him for using his sturdy and shield-like body to protect his friends. He recalled the true worth of melee magic. Drago now regretted not being able to protect his friends as his father had hoped. Just as Giovanni's attack was about to strike, Drago realized that he had no way to defend himself. But suddenly, he sensed something unusual. Giovanni, surprised, remarked that he didn't expect Drago to last this long, wondering if he had overexerted himself. Giovanni looked around, realizing Drago wasn't there anymore. Then he saw Setsuna standing with flares around him. Drago, sensing the warmth nearby, wondered if that was Setsuna. Giovanni was shocked to see Setsuna's new form and was stunned when he suddenly disappeared. In an instant, Setsuna struck him with a powerful punch, sending Giovanni crashing into the wall. Giovanni wondered how a close combat mage could possibly use elemental magic. He also noticed that his recovery speed was slowing down and the flames surrounding Setsuna were unlike any he had ever seen. Then Giovanni saw another crest on Setsuna's body. This meant that Setsuna had two different magical lines, which should have been impossible. Giovanni was beginning to question whether he was truly afraid of Setsuna. He shouted that it was impossible, and then launched an attack, declaring that he was undead, someone who had overcome death. He unleashed a vortex of poison, believing that no living being could survive it. But Setsuna moved effortlessly, evading the poison and pushing it away simply by releasing his mana. Giovanni was shocked and wondered where Setsuna had gained such power. The sheer force coming from Setsuna was overwhelming, and Giovanni questioned what was happening. He realized that Setsuna's power was so great that he couldn't even control it properly, and he poked Setsuna for losing consciousness during the battle. Giovanni then slashed at Setsuna's back, hoping to injure him. However, Setsuna dodged the attack effortlessly. Giovanni was left stunned, wondering how Setsuna had managed to do that. Had he been moving purely on instinct? If so, Giovanni realized that as long as he could stop Setsuna's movements, he would win. Giovanni then landed a direct hit on Setsuna, telling him that now he wouldn't be able to move anymore. He acknowledged that Setsuna's power was worth noting, but ultimately, he was just a human in a battlefield full of dragons. Giovanni vowed to sever his head, declaring that being undead was far better than being human. Just then, Layla arrived to stop him. She apologized for being late and declared that she wouldn't let Giovanni hurt Setsuna anymore. Giovanni, still focused on Setsuna, hadn't noticed her arrival and now aimed to end her swiftly. Layla looked at Setsuna and noticed that he seemed to be losing consciousness. With the red hair and flames still surrounding him, she wondered what was happening to him. She vowed to do her best to protect Setsuna. Meanwhile, Setsuna found himself back in the place where he had met the spirit. The spirit mocked him, calling him a pathetic human to be consumed by such weak flames. Setsuna responded, saying the spirit didn't understand. He thought that the two of them had already assimilated, and just then he saw Layla's face. He asked the spirit how he could control the power and return to the real world. The spirit replied, telling Setsuna not to ask him, but to find the answer himself. It was the first time the spirit had ever granted his power to a human. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Layla was struck by Giovanni's attack and fell to the ground. Despite her fall, she recalled the words Setsuna had told her before. As long as she had resolve in her heart, even someone like her could become stronger. He remembered a lady patting her head and telling her not to rush things, that as long as she resolved her heart, she would surely grow stronger. As Layla struggled against Giovanni's assault, the spirit grew excited, wondering if Layla's end would come along with Setsuna's. If that were the case, the spirit mused, then it would be the one to end Setsuna's life. Just as Giovanni made Layla fall to the ground, Setsuna rushed forward, unleashing the power of the flame spirit, an inferno of magic aimed directly at Giovanni. Setsuna told Giovanni that earlier he had mentioned immortality being a blessing, but that humans had a limited amount of time, so they had no choice but to work hard and grow. Setsuna reflected that it was at the edge of death when he had grasped the fire spirit's magic. Giovanni insisted it was impossible to achieve such power, but Setsuna defeated him. Layla, still recovering, called out to him, asking if he was really Setsuna. He nodded, telling her that everything was now fine. He approached her, thanking her for protecting him, and asked how her wounds were. She replied that she was fine and was glad to see they were both okay as well. Drago, still surprised, remarked that he never expected Layla to arrive. She explained that their seniors had managed to escape using the teleportation magic, but she had a bad feeling and decided to check on them. She told them to explain the situation to the professors who were standing by, confident that help would arrive soon. Suddenly, Setsuna felt something unusual and then fainted. As the three of them lay unconscious, the rescue team arrived. A woman observed that the three students from the close combat department were safe and alive, and she praised their efforts. A man helped Setsuna up, explaining that they had heard the situation from Mifune and came to their rescue. Setsuna requested that they take care of Layla and Drago first. He then saw that they were being taken as well. Later, Setsuna woke up in a room and realized he was in the infirmary. He sat up, commenting that it felt like he was a regular patient there. Even now, he could still feel the heat from the battle within his body. Lionel entered the room, noticing that Setsuna was awake. As Lionel approached to sit down, Setsuna asked about the others. Lionel replied that Setsuna had worried about his friends even while in a coma for 3 days. He assured Setsuna that Drago, Layla, and their senior from the formation department were doing fine. Setsuna, it seemed, was the last one to wake up. Lionel explained that he had heard Setsuna fought against a powerful enemy, and the after effects of the incident had been resolved by the principal's orders. Setsuna thought it was good that there were still many things they didn't know yet. Lionel then apologized for the incident he had heard about from the principal involving Leo. He mentioned that there were others like him, dangerous individuals, and that an internal investigation had been ordered. However, the investigation had been delayed because of the recent events, and they had failed to notice Giovanni's ambition. Lionel expressed his regret that the students had been put in danger twice and promised that such an incident would never happen again. As Lionel lowered his head in apology, Setsuna told him to raise it. He was about to say something when a sharp pain suddenly surged through his body. Lionel supported him, explaining that the pain was due to the after effects of using his mana beyond his limit. However, his wounds had already been healed with healing magic, so there was no need to worry. Lionel added that it was probably thanks to the person who had rushed in to treat Setsuna. Setsuna wondered who that person might be. Just then, someone knocked on the door. Lionel said the person had arrived on their own. The door opened and in walked Professor Zachary, holding peeled apples for Setsuna to eat. Lionel playfully hit Zachary on the back, telling him not to say anything and that he had something he wanted to say to Setsuna. Zachary, looking serious, apologized for how he had treated Setsuna during the orientation test. He explained that he had considered the close combat department to be the weakest, and despite that, the most irritating part had been seeing someone like Setsuna there. Zachary revealed that he had once been an honor student at the academy, but after realizing that his only path was close combat magic, his family and friends had abandoned him. Hearing about Setsuna's choice, despite being suited for any magic path, angered Zachary. He couldn't understand why someone like Setsuna would choose close combat magic over any other path. However, Zachary's perspective changed after hearing a report. Setsuna's team had scored the highest in the joint training, and Setsuna had also recorded the highest score ever in the Close Combat Academy. Because of that achievement, the joint training with the Kingdom's Magus Battalion was cancelled. But Zachary was more pleased by how Setsuna had proven that even the Close Combat Department could perform at such a high level. He extended his hand towards Setsuna, thanking him for the demonstration. Setsuna thought to himself that Zachary was now a completely different person. He wondered if that was because his first impression of Zachary had been so bad. Setsuna then extended his hand for a handshake, saying that he too had to apologize and thank Zachary for saving him. Zachary nodded and said he would see Setsuna in class before leaving. Afterward, Lionel took out a glove, saying that the principal had asked him to give it to Setsuna. He mentioned that it wouldn't be practical for Setsuna to always wear bandages to cover his hand. The glove was designed for the spirit magic crest that Setsuna carried, an ancient magic crest no one had ever seen or heard of before. Setsuna asked if Lionel knew about spirit magic. Lionel revealed that spirit magic was also known as ancient magic, and it triggered the Great Magic War between mages 100 years ago, and everything related to it had been forbidden ever since. Lionel urged Setsuna not to use it in front of others, warning that if the Holy Church found out about it, it would spell disaster for him. Setsuna thought back to what he had learned in history about the forbidden magic used during the Great Magic War 100 years ago. He never expected that the specific magic would be spirit magic. Curiously, he'd asked Lionel how he knew about it. Lionel replied that the principal had briefly explained the details to him about the evil god, his apostles, spirit magic, and even about Setsuna regressing from the future. Only Lionel and the principal knew about this secret within the academy. Setsuna was relieved that Lionel knew about him, but he couldn't help wondering if this had been the best option. Lionel reassured him, saying he didn't care about what kind of past Setsuna had in his previous life. What mattered now was that he was a student of the close combat department. Setsuna thanked him and then asked where the principal was. Lionel explained that the principal had found a clue regarding the apostles and would be away for a while chasing that lead. Setsuna wondered what these clues were. Lionel stood up, saying that when the principal returns, Setsuna could ask him about it. For now, he should rest, and when he had recovered, Lionel had something else to tell him. Setsuna wondered what it could be. As Lionel left, Setsuna glanced at his hand, thinking about the battle. Hadn't he used the power of the spirit? It couldn't have ended badly for him. He managed to control that power thanks to Layla, but he wasn't confident he could do it again. He removed the bandages from his palm and looked at the sign on its back, thinking about the tremendous power it represented. A voice suddenly spoke, confirming his thoughts that it really was. Don't think a mere human like him could easily control the power of the spirit. Setsuna wondered if the voice came from the spirit itself, but as he looked around, he saw no one. Suddenly, something appeared under the blanket he was wearing. With incredible speed, a pet appeared and placed itself on Setsuna's head. The creature spoke cheerfully, saying, "Rejoice, and ye have manifested myself." Setsuna asked if he was truly the spirit. The spirit confirmed, noting that Setsuna had been rude by calling him that, and then introduced himself as Blazer, asking Setsuna not to forget his name. Setsuna thought that even in this form, somehow Blazer's previous image didn't quite fit him. Blazer jumped to the window to look outside, marveling at how amazing modern human society looked, with everything appearing so large. Setsuna thought this was because Blazer was small, and he asked if that was something special. Blazer replied that while human society might not be inherently special, it was providing him with a new perspective, and this was his first time in such a form. Setsuna was surprised and asked why Blazer had taken this form. Blazer explained that he usually wasn't obligated to answer such questions, but he would make an exception that day. He told Setsuna that they were connected through the crest, and in order to maintain his form properly, Blazer needed a certain amount of mana. However, if he stayed in his original form, the mana of a mortal like Setsuna would run out quickly. That was why Blazer had taken a smaller form. Seeing this as his opportunity to ask about the spirits, Setsuna inquired if Blazer had been involved in the Great Magical War that took place around 100 years ago and what the outcome of that conflict was. Blazer's expression changed, and he responded nonchalantly that he didn't remember much of the details. He had only gone on a rampage during his contractor's war, and he wasn't interested in the past. What he enjoyed most was the present moment. Blazer then ran out of the room, and Setsuna hurried to follow, calling for him to wait. Setsuna thought that it wouldn't be good if the existence of a spirit were discovered by the Holy Church, as they would both be sent for an inquisition. He needed to stop Blazer before that happened, so he rushed to catch up. Blazer had already exited the building and was looking around, drawing the attention of other students. Some wondered if Blazer was a dog, and the girls found him incredibly cute. Setsuna called out to Blazer, urging him to wait. Blazer looked back in surprise and asked why Setsuna was following him, considering how weak his body was. He wondered if Setsuna was sure he could keep up with him. Setsuna thought that if his body were in perfect condition, he would see what would happen next. As Blazer continued on, Setsuna chased after him and encountered Noel. Noel told Setsuna that he was getting cocky, thinking his victory in the exchange match was due to pure luck. He warned that the golems under his command would now be able to withstand any attack from Setsuna. Ignoring him, Setsuna pressed on. Noel, annoyed by the dismissal, scowled as he watched Setsuna leave. Just then, Carl appeared and, acting all noble, forgave Setsuna for his rudeness earlier. As Carl was going to say about Layla, he saw Setsuna ignore him so brutally to head ahead, causing him to remark that Setsuna was being disrespectful. Setsuna, uninterested, responded that he didn't understand what Carl meant and advised him to just leave it at that. Carl, offended, muttered that Setsuna was acting terribly disrespectful. As Setsuna moved on, Silas watched him from a hidden spot. The evening drew near, and Setsuna gets to a hall, reluctantly accepting defeat at Blazer's hands. Myfune, noticing Setsuna's exhaustion, asked what had happened and why he was panting so heavily. One girl, speaking to another, asked if Setsuna was the close combat mage who had trained with Myfune during the joint training session. The second girl nodded, commenting that Setsuna had reached the top thanks to Myfune's help. Myfune scolded them, telling them not to mock his friend again. After the girls left, Myfune apologized to Setsuna, explaining that the atmosphere had become tense after his high score during the joint training, despite not knowing the full situation. Setsuna admitted that he had never expected to be treated as a friend by Myfune. Myfune responded that everyone was worth being used as a friend in his eyes. Setsuna noted that Myfune's personality was unique, to which Myfune brought up the joint training again, mentioning Yuzuha, who had fallen into a trap. Though her life was not in danger, the after effects still lingered, and it seemed that she had been imprisoned and was currently being interrogated by the professors. Setsuna wondered if they were talking about Giovanni and grew suspicious of him. He then asked if Myfune had seen a small red animal there. Myfune pointed out that it was heading toward the courtyard. Setsuna decided they should leave immediately. At the courtyard, Blazer was playing with some flowers. The students were curious about what kind of animal Blazer was, as they had never seen anything like it before and wondered whose pet it could be. Actar, also watching, wondered if it was a magical beast. Setsuna called out to Blazer, but when Actar saw him, he grew angry. He thought to himself that Setsuna was becoming increasingly annoying, especially after managing to destroy all the evidence of his rigging the fight during the exchange battle. Despite his efforts, a keen professor had still noticed the discrepancies. Realizing Blazer was Setsuna's pet, Actar decided to take action, thinking that by accusing Setsuna of bringing a magical beast into the academy, he could justify attacking it to ensure the safety of the school. He intended to strike Blazer, confident that the academy wouldn't be able to blame him for his actions now. Blazer seemed concerned about the attack, but he quickly countered it by unleashing fire, blowing it away. Actar was shocked to see this and angrily told Blazer to know his place. However, his clothes were burned from the front, and in embarrassment, he quickly ran away. Setsuna was relieved that Blazer was unharmed. However, he soon noticed that the other students were staring, murmuring among themselves. Seeing Actar being humiliated and witnessing Blazer's power firsthand, some students began to worry. If Blazer could use his real abilities even in such a small form, it could pose a serious danger. One boy wondered about the flames, commenting on how incredibly powerful they were. Another questioned whether that much fire had really come from such a small creature. Blazer simply brushed it off, asking if they were all friends of that police guy. The students, feeling intimidated, decided to leave. Meanwhile, Layla had been watching Blazer closely. When Setsuna noticed her, he was stepped back. As she seemed lost in thought, Blazer asked what she was thinking about and if she also wanted to be burned by him. Setsuna thought that if it were Blazer, he would surely burn her. As Layla approached, Blazer remarked that it seemed she had already prepared. Layla then knelt to thank him for helping Setsuna in the dungeon, bowing in gratitude for saving her precious friend. Blazer acknowledged her good attitude, telling her to be thankful that he had linked his powers to Setsuna. Setsuna noticed that Blazer's mood had shifted. Layla then picked some fruit from a basket and offered it to Blazer, mentioning that she had brought it for him while visiting Setsuna. Blazer began eating, commenting that it was a good gift. He quickly added that it wasn't so bad and that he actually loved it. Setsuna thought to himself that Blazer was easily domesticated. As the students were having their meal, Blazer sat on Layla's lap, eating her food. Drivo remarked on Blazer's amazing appetite and then asked Setsuna what kind of animal Blazer was. Setsuna replied that Blazer was a magical beast. He thought that if he revealed Blazer's true identity as a spirit, the church would take notice, and even if it was Drago, he couldn't involve him in such a matter. For now, Setsuna still needed to stay vigilant, but Blazer didn't seem to pose any immediate threat to the students. Noticing that Blazer had already finished Layla's food, Setsuna passed in his own, thanking Layla. She said nothing, and it seemed that Blazer was simply nervous about being surrounded by so many people. As a girl and a boy walked by, the girl mentioned that Setsuna was the close combat mage who had scored the highest during the joint training. The boy then commented on Blazer, saying he had never seen an animal like that before. Blazer was about to eat Setsuna's food when he remarked that an existence like his would attract a lot of attention. He added that if it was just idle gossip, he would let them off. Setsuna thought to himself that Blazer was being treated like a rare animal. Blazer then told Layla that if she brought him gifts like that in the future, he would make her his subordinate. Setsuna was glad that he was the only one who could understand and hear Blazer's voice like that. Setsuna then called out to both Layla and Drago, thanking them for saving him in the dungeon. Layla replied that saving a friend was only natural. Drago, with his usual deadpan expression, pulled out something from his belongings. He showed an envelope and explained that his parents had heard the news about his high score during the joint training. They were so happy that they even sent a letter, making him proud to be a close combat mage. Setsuna was glad to hear this and smiled at the thought. Layla called out to Setsuna, expressing her concern about Giovanni's true identity. Setsuna admitted that he didn't know the details, but they might learn more once Yuzuha's interrogation was complete. He thought back to when they first encountered Giovanni, suspecting he was an apostle. The only special ability Giovanni seemed to have was controlling the Hydra, and that power alone was something only an apostle could possess. Drago, looking serious, mentioned that he wanted to ask Setsuna about the power he displayed in the dungeon. He had seen the energy field made from Setsuna's mana, which didn't seem like close combat magic at all. Setsuna hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Layla then speculated that Blazer had lent his powers to Setsuna. Blazer, hearing this, remarked that Layla had a good eye since she had sensed where the power was coming from. Setsuna realized that Blazer had been completely domesticated, and he himself felt somewhat empty, unsure of how to explain this situation properly. Suddenly, Professor Silas called out to Setsuna. As Silas approached, two other students wondered aloud if Silas was going to scold another student again. Silas yelled at them to leave, and they quickly complied. He then pointed at Blazer and asked what kind of animal he was, as he had never seen such a magical beast before. He noted that it didn't appear to be one of the banned magical beasts. Setsuna thought to himself that this was a bad situation. Silas continued scolding him, saying that didn't he know he need to register his pet at the academy? Blazer, hearing Silas call him a pet, bristled with anger. Silas, noticing the reaction, wondered if there was a legitimate reason for Blazer's presence. If not, it would have to make arrangements to remove the animal. Blazer, now furious, was ready to retaliate, but before anything escalated, Zachary appeared, apologizing for the oversight. He explained that he had received the registration form but had carelessly forgotten about it. He bowed to Silas in apology. Setsuna understood that Professor Zachary was covering for him. Silas, visibly surprised, remarked that a professor was lowering his head for a student, especially for one like Setsuna, who had been the top and most honored student in the close combat department. Silas found the situation quite embarrassing. Zachary, still bowing, acknowledged that it was as Silas said. Drago, frustrated, slammed a table and stood up, walking towards Zachary. He then turned to Zachary and with a grin said that it's all thanks to him. The reason the close combat department finished first during the joint training was because of Professor Zachary. Setsuna and Layla approached Zachary to thank him. Setsuna thanked the professor sincerely, while Layla, despite his unconventional methods, expressed gratitude, saying that everything he had done was for their sake. Zachary, touched by their words, acted emotional but also seemed to enjoy the attention from the three of them. Silas, visibly annoyed, wondered aloud what foolishness they were all involved in and whether they truly believed such a thing was believable. The girl turned to a boy and whispered that the close combat department was currently ranked higher than Silas' department. The boy added that it was no wonder Silas was acting so high and mighty. Angered by their comments, Silas snapped, telling them to just submit the document by the next morning without further delay. Setsuna, relieved that he had been saved from a worse situation, realized that Blazer was just on the edge of losing his temper, but it hadn't gone that far. He then thanked Zachary for his help, even though Zachary didn't know the full details, and appreciated that Zachary had come through for them. Zachary, with a smile, replied that he should be the one thanking Setsuna. He added that considering the circumstances, he was sure there was a reason behind bringing the magical beast. Drago, with admiration, said that Zachary was a role model for the other professors. Layla agreed, but Blazer, uninterested, dismissed the conversation as useless. After that, Blazer and Setsuna left the area. As they walked, a bird flew toward them, carrying a scroll. Setsuna read it and found that it was a letter congratulating him on his success with spirit magic. The letter also expressed concern, warning that the principal was worried Setsuna might struggle to control the magic while still recovering from his injuries. The principal, wishing to teach him personally, was unavailable and had arranged for someone else to instruct him in his absence. Setsuna wondered who this person could be and how they would help him control the spirit magic. The letter continued, stating that Lionel would be introducing this individual to him. The principal concluded by wishing Setsuna good luck. Setsuna felt grateful to the principal for the support. The scene then shifted to a house where an old lady was reading a letter. She scoffed, muttering about how nonsensical the contents were. A girl was sweeping nearby with a bucket full of water beside her. The old lady complained about having to teach someone else how to use spirit magic. She was upset that the principal had exposed her methods without her permission. She added that even though the boy, Setsuna, was recommended by the principal, she would not forgive him if he turned out to be incompetent. If that were the case, she would deal with him personally. The scene shifts to the urgent magic conference, where Principal Danham reported what he had discovered. Someone even asked him if he thought that would be enough to resolve the issue. Another individual mentioned the signs of the emergence of the evil god and the dark apostles, which made hearing Danhan's words seem all the more alarming. A lady noted that Danhan didn't have any concrete evidence. Danhan responded that no evidence had been left behind by their enemies, which was precisely why he had come to them seeking assistance. Some were unable to accept it, while another person suggested that Danhan might have already forgotten something important. After the meeting, Danon stepped outside the room to meet Leon, commenting on how hectic the meeting had been. Lionel, who was there, said it was to be expected. Danon sat down, acknowledging that it was understandable that they didn't believe him. Lionel pointed out that they were dealing with forbidden spirit magic, a matter that couldn't be easily discussed. Danon replied that the fact such an event had occurred could not be ignored, and that if the apostles made their move, his proposal would at least be a step towards something useful. Danon then asked about Setsuna's condition. Lionel explained that Setsuna was recovering well, though he was still pushing himself too hard. It would take some time for him to fully recover. Danon remarked that the new teacher for Setsuna would be quite strict. After all, he hoped that Setsuna would fully recover before meeting that person. Meanwhile, as Setsuna slept in his room, Carol sat beside him, watching over him. He woke up, surprised to see her, and asked why she was there. She replied that she had heard he was unwell and had come to bring food to aid his recovery. As she opened the food boxes, she explained that the recipe was something Drago had taught her. Setsuna thanked her, especially for taking care of Blazer since the previous day. Carol reassured him that it wasn't a problem, mentioning that they had walked around the town together with Lila. She also brought some fruits to feed Blazer, whose voice was so cute, like a Q sound. Setsuna understood why others thought Blazer was so adorable. Carol commented on how amazing Layla was, as she had treated Blazer without any trace of hostile mana. Setsuna asked if that was really true, and Carol confirmed, saying that Layla had done it as though it were the most natural thing in the world. She explained that treating someone without creating any walls was important, especially when doing something difficult like that. Since Carol was always with her phantom beasts, she could sense how much they appreciated being treated with kindness. Setsuna said that was typical of Layla, and he thought she had been taking care of him ever since the incident in the dungeon. He couldn't just remain passive throughout the whole ordeal, and as soon as his body fully recovered, he would need guidance on how to use spirit magic. Carol then set the rest of the food aside and said she was leaving for class, asking him to make sure he returned with Blazer. As she left, Setsuna thought about how Carol and Layla were taking care of Blazer, while he needed to gather as much information as possible about spirit magic. He had read in a book that 200 years ago, a great war had occurred. The followers of an individual tried to control other Magi, and the two sides fought across the continents. The power of outside magic was immense, but only a few Magi could wield it, and in the end, the Magi had won, leaving the world peaceful. The moment an ancient magic user was discovered, they would be interrogated and purged, and the knowledge itself was considered too dangerous to spread. This was why Setsuna had to keep his contract with Blazer a secret. He lay back, thinking about how he had never known spirit magic in his past life. If he could master this power, he would be one step closer to defeating the evil god. But he also thought about the events in his current life, the encounter with Leo during the exchange match and Giovanni's berserker during the joint training, neither of which had occurred in his previous life. If history was being altered, was he making the right choices? A few days later, it was the day Setsuna had fully recovered and was ready to train with Lionel. Carol didn't seem happy and asked if he was really sure about it. He agreed, saying it was during the academy holiday. Drago mentioned he would train hard so that he wouldn't lose to Setsuna. Setsuna replied that he was looking forward to it. Layla was sad, as she would have to stay away from Blazer and felt she would be lonely. Blazer asked her to prepare a lot of fruits for when he returned. Setsuna appreciated everything Carol and Layla had done for him, and now he was leaving. Carol and Layla wished them to be careful. Lionel remarked that Setsuna really had good friends. Setsuna agreed, thinking about how his main concern was Blazer. He worried about whether he could take care of Blazer on his own, but he couldn't just let Layla handle it all the time. The two of them reached the place where they would take the carriage, as the journey ahead was long. Setsuna suggested using the lizard carriage, but Lionel explained that it was difficult to master riding them. However, it was the best option for long-distance travel, as all they needed to do was cling to the lizard. The owner of the lizards told them that they were very fast and the ride might be rough. He also warned that he wouldn't take responsibility if any student got injured while riding one. Setsuna was fine with that, thinking it would depend on the lizard, and he resonated with them. Setsuna easily mounted the lizard, thinking that if he just treated it naturally, it would respond well. As he settled in, he remarked that it seemed fine. The man who owned the lizard clapped in surprise, apologizing for underestimating Setsuna due to his age. He explained that most people struggled in the beginning. Setsuna recalled riding similar creatures in his previous life. As Setsuna and Lionel set off, Blazer seemed to enjoy the ride. Looking at Lionel's face, Setsuna asked if he was feeling motion sickness. Lionel replied that he wasn't used to it yet. As they traveled, they noticed 3 women armed with weapons standing in their path. Something about them felt different. They didn't seem like ordinary bandits. As Lionel had suspected, one of the women confirmed that they were Jabardest, servants of the witch Morgana. Setsuna recognized the name. It was written in the letter he had received from the principal. The woman then addressed him, identifying him as a spirit magic magus. Lionel explained that they were on their way to meet their master, and he questioned if the 3 had come to retrieve them. Just then, one of the women spoke in a completely different tone, stating that she had no interest in meeting a mere close combat mage. The shift in voice was so drastic that Lionel immediately asked if they were Morgana's servant. Setsuna dismounted, trying to figure out who they really were. Lionel quietly told him that these were not humans. Realizing this, Setsuna understood they were dolls created through alchemy. One of the women looked at Setsuna and commented that he was probably chosen by a spirit by sheer coincidence. If she was wrong, she challenged him to prove it by defeating them. Without hesitation, they launched an attack. As one of the women attacked Setsuna directly, he swiftly raised his sword, blocking the strike. Meanwhile, Lionel made the lizards step back, then countered with a powerful punch against their attackers. Setsuna analyzed the situation, realizing that for dolls to possess such immense power, their master must be exceptionally strong. The woman smirked, noting that Setsuna was in trouble, as expected. She added that she had no obligation to teach a close combat magus about spirit magic. Lionel, annoyed by her arrogance, stated that she was looking down on them. He then summoned a giant sword, declaring that if she intended to fight seriously, he would do the same. Setsuna thought that in order for Morgana to accept him, he would have to defeat the dolls. Lionel told Setsuna that they didn't have any other choice, so they had to fight. The women attacked with a giant magical ball, and Setsuna, along with Lionel, reacted quickly. Lionel mentioned that they didn't have to dodge the attack but should just keep pushing forward. He gave Setsuna a signal and cut through it, and Setsuna realized how powerful the Zamana blade was. A lady then spoke that they seemed quite capable. As she did, the three women rushed to attack once more. Setsuna noticed that their weapons were charged with lightning. One of the women swung her weapon at Setsuna, and he managed to dodge just in time. Another woman aimed a blast of black lightning at both Setsuna and Lionel, and they both leaped to avoid it. The third woman was about to strike when Lionel warned Setsuna that if the attack hit them, they would be electrocuted. Setsuna understood and jumped out of the way, narrowly avoiding the spread of electricity. Morgana observed that if they were weak against the elemental magic, they would eventually outlast and overpower mages, who couldn't defend against such attacks. Setsuna thought about why close combat mages were weak against elemental attacks. If the attack hit them, their bodies would suffer the consequences, while those who used external mana would take less damage. This made it almost impossible for close combat mages to endure such attacks. Morgana commented that even the modern Magus armies still use golems or summoned beasts to fight on the front lines. She claimed that close combat mages were relics of the past and that Setsuna and Lionel wouldn't be able to win against her dogs in close-range combat. Setsuna replied that it was true that close combat mages have fallen out of favor, but that didn't mean they lacked potential. He dodged to get closer to one of the women, saying that close combat magic still had its place. With that, he delivered a powerful punch. Meanwhile, Lionel fought against the second woman, and when he saw an opening, he punched her in the back, explaining that he hadn't destroyed her, only incapacitated her. As the women continued battling with Setsuna, Lionel dodging attack after attack, Setsuna focused and began channeling power into his hand. He thought carefully, imagining the strongest weapon he could create in this situation. When one of the women attacked him with her weapon, he jumped to dodge, then used the nearby tree branch to leap into the air and deliver a powerful kick from behind. Morgana, observing this, remarked that they were altering the structure of the mana blade and trying to use the environment to his advantage. Lionel was also fighting against another woman. Setsuna noted that his strikes were meant to target Lionel's opponent and thought about how his polished body, honed through training, combined with his technique and mana control, was making all of this possible. If they used their abilities properly, they wouldn't be lacking in close combat. An attack struck to the ground, and Lionel quickly jumped back. The three women joined hands, and Morgana sent a message implying that no sneak attacks would work against them. She wondered how they would manage to break through the elemental magic at close range. The women conjured a magic ball, and Setsuna thought that if they didn't attack him directly, he might be able to break it with a charged bullet. However, its firepower would surely diminish due to the water magic they were using. Blazer suddenly appeared, claiming that breaking the magic was easy. He said that if they used his power, they might even destroy the entire forest. Setsuna's elemental magic activated, flares of energy surrounding him. Blazer praised him for maintaining his focus, and now he was going to increase the firepower to burn them down. As Blazer increased the intensity, Setsuna felt a sharp pain and asked him to hold off. Blazer stopped, asking why Setsuna was hesitating. Didn't he want to defeat the three women? Setsuna explained that while he did want to win, this was a test of his own strength. Blazer called him ridiculous. Just then, the magic barrier disappeared, and Morgana instructed her maids to bring Setsuna to her. Lionel, confused, wondered what had just happened. The women apologized for their rudeness and asked him to follow them. Eventually, they reached a large house where Morgana was waiting, standing next to a girl. She called out to Setsuna by name, and he realized it was Morgana. She asked why he hadn't used spirit magic in the battle. Against a shield made of water, his close combat magic would have been ineffective, and using it might have failed him. Setsuna replied that it was exactly as she said, but he had to hide his spirit magic at all costs. That was why he had chosen not to use it against enemies he didn't know. Furthermore, if he had used spirit magic in that situation, the whole forest would have burned, and destroying nature and harming animals for no reason was something he wanted to avoid. Morgana commented that Setsuna was too soft-hearted, but she praised him for not forcing himself to use spirit magic when he couldn't control it yet. If he had used it in that situation, he would have failed. However, she would guide him on how to control it. Setsuna bowed his head in gratitude. Blazer, watching the exchange, wondered if Morgana was seriously talking about controlling him. It seemed like a joke. Morgana responded, saying that while Setsuna was strong, no matter what she saw, he was still an unrefined animal. Blazer replied that he would show her his true form. He began to grow slightly, and Setsuna realized that Blazer was forcefully absorbing mana from him. Blazer declared that he would burn everything, even her bones, if it came to that. Setsuna panicked, realizing that he couldn't control Blazer's power, and if this continued, everything would be reduced to ashes. Morgana reassured him that there were no other humans living in the forest, which made it easier for her to control the situation. However, she wouldn't let Blazer burn all down. With that, she summoned her spirit, declaring that she would show Setsuna how a true spirit should be controlled. Blazer attacked her with a fireball, but as it struck Morgana's body, she transformed into water and regenerated effortlessly. She declared that it was time to end the battle. Using her power, she summoned a massive surge of water from the lake, leaving Lionel in shock. The water rushed toward Blazer, extinguishing its flames. Morgana stated that the spirit had merely formed a weak bond with Setsuna, making its power insufficient. It was nothing more than a wild beast. However, if Setsuna were to establish a true bond with his spirit, he would be able to control its manifestation and power freely. He contemplated the idea of mastering nature to such an extent. After the battle, Morgana explained that there were 3 stages of mastery in spirit magic. The first stage was becoming one with nature. The second was entering the spirit world at will, confronting the spirit and earning its genuine recognition. She had heard that Setsuna had forced a contract without even properly completing the first stage, which was why his spirit magic remained incomplete. Frustrated, Morgana scolded Dahan, calling him a brat and accusing him of failing to teach Setsuna properly. Setsuna was taken aback. How could Morgana refer to the headmaster in such a way? Morgana then revealed that the forest was home to many spirits, making it the ideal place to reach a state of selflessness. Starting the next day, Setsuna's training would begin. Morgana asked him to demonstrate the qualities that had led the spirit to choose him. He agreed, and the following day, she observed him meditating in the forest. Throughout the day, he not only practiced diligently with the others, but also helped with household chores and kept the house clean. One night, as he was training near the lake, several glowing lights began to descend around him. He immediately understood that he was amidst the presence of nature itself. Gazing toward the house perched on the cliff, he murmured to himself that he was now ready to face Blazer. As they gathered in the house, Morgana remarked that it seems Setsuna had sensed the presence of the spirits and reached this stage in just 2 weeks, an impressive feat. She explained that from this point on, he would need to enter the spirit world and form a bond with the spirits. However, she revealed that in the spirit world, magic power was meaningless and only one's true strength mattered. Even though Setsuna had gained the ability to perceive spirits, facing Blazer alone would still be too much for him. Morgana decided she would accompany him. Blazer acknowledged the unusual circumstances but remained skeptical, questioning whether Morgana truly believed she could challenge him in the spirit world. She warned Setsuna not to get too full of himself. Setsuna calmly responded that all he needed was Blazer's approval. Morgana then turned to Lionel, explaining that while they were in the spirit world, their physical bodies would be completely defenseless. Since this place was their hideout, guarded by their servants, she entrusted Lionel with their protection. Lionel agreed, assuring them that he and the others would safeguard their bodies while they were away. Morgana suggested they begin and instructed Setsuna to first reach a state of selflessness. Once he did, the door to the spirit world would open. Setsuna followed her guidance, and when he opened his eyes, he found himself standing face to face with Blazer, with Morgana by his side. Morgana remarked that Blazer's arrogance was not without merit. Setsuna realized that since he could not perceive the spirits, he understood the true extent of Blazer's power. Blazer, noticing the change, commented that it seemed Morgana was taking this a bit more seriously. She then created a barrier and explained that it was meant to protect Blazer's will. She warned that if Setsuna confronted him directly, he might be left behind in the spirit world. Blazer scoffed, telling Morgana not to get ahead of herself and questioning if she truly believed she could control his power with such weak determination. Setsuna, now enraged, retorted that he had trained in magic control more than anyone. Since spirit power followed the same principles, he had mastered it as well. Now that he had reached a state of selflessness, he believed that nothing would hold him back. If he wanted Blazer's approval, there was still one more way to prove himself. Blazer warned him not to regret bringing such a burden upon himself. Meanwhile, Lionel and a girl were in the house observing the situation. Lionel remarked that it seems Setsuna had begun, and he was confident Setsuna would manage. However, he felt a dark magic power approaching, something malicious. It was heading toward the hideout, and at such a critical time, he couldn't let anyone interrupt the battle between Setsuna and Blazer. With the dark aura surrounding him, Leo entered the room, excusing himself before asking if anyone was home. His eyes landed on Lionel, and he wondered if Lionel was from the close combat department. To his surprise, he also spotted Setsuna, who would save him some trouble. Lionel, recognizing Leo, mentioned that he was a runaway student they had been searching for. To think that Leo had come to find them. Suddenly, Zagan burst into the room, destroying the wall, and struck a doll, calling them his rookie. He declared that he would take both the old lady and Setsuna. Leo, surprised by Zagan's intentions, reminded him that they used to be best friends. He asked if Zagan couldn't settle for just the old lady and the doll. Lionel immediately realized that Zagan was also an apostle. He grimaced, noting that they had arrived at the worst possible time. If he weren't a teacher, he would have run. Leo, sensing the tension, told Lionel that if he wanted to, he could leave, as they weren't after him. However, Lionel, unwilling to back down, created a mana sword, telling Leo not to mock him. He explained that in their academy, there was no teacher who would abandon their students. With that, he charged to attack. Blazer told Morgana that she would make him acknowledge her, but he believed those claims were just empty words. Setsuna thought to himself not to be swayed, for this was a world where willpower meant everything, and he needed to keep his heart strong. Setsuna glanced at Morgana, unsure of what was happening. She replied that something was wrong in the real world. An evil presence was invading the forest, and it seemed her servants had already been subdued. Setsuna was concerned but urged Morgana to go ahead. Morgana warned him that if she released the barrier, Setsuna might be burned by the spirit's will and could even be unable to return to the real world. Setsuna dismissed her warning, saying that the trial he must face should be faced alone. He asked her to take care of the teacher and the servants. Blazer gave a final command, telling Setsuna to return, as it wouldn't be worth it if he died there after all the guidance he had received. Setsuna reassured her that he would be back. Morgana, seeing his determination, removed the barrier so he could leave. He apologized to Blazer for making him wait. Blazer then asked why Setsuna desired his power so much, noting that it was far beyond his reach and wondering if he was willing to burn himself for it. Setsuna replied that he had lost everything in the world before his regression. Blazer paused, realizing that this was the landscape of Setsuna's mind. Setsuna continued, explaining that the magic army was manipulated by the apostles and that the world had collapsed and could not be rebuilt. His mentors had all been taken from him, and that regret awakened the power of the time spirit to send him back. Now he swore that he wouldn't let anyone take anything from him again. Blazer, intrigued, wondered if Setsuna's motivation was revenge on those who destroyed the world, or perhaps a challenge. He found it to be a beautiful display of human motivation, but facing such despair without fear, that was madness, and Setsuna was certainly an interesting one. Blazer acknowledged that Setsuna was worthy of facing a trial, but what he desired was not just a part of his power, but all of it. With that, Blazer took a smaller, more human-like form and said that it wouldn't be a test of individuals like before, but a trial set by Blazer himself. Setsuna wondered if this was a clash of wills and rushed forward to attack Blazer. Blazer responded in kind, and they both struck out with their hands, clashing in the spirit world. Back in the real world, Lionel was locked in battle with Zagan. He managed to sever part of Zagan's feather, and Zagan remarked that Lionel was pretty decent for a human. As they fought, Zagan sensed the use of alchemy magic and suddenly lifted himself, shouting for everyone to get out of the way. Just as Zagan was about to strike, a doll appeared, taking the blow at his place. Morgana then pulled Leo away from the house, breaking through the wall to escape the attack. Lionel thought to himself that after repeatedly using such grand techniques, Zagan should be exhausted. So how was it that his mana was actually getting stronger instead? Zagan, noticing his confusion, told Lionel not to slack off. Lionel agreed and was about to attack, but Morgana intervened, using her magic to block his attack. She wondered aloud how they could be so noisy in someone else's house. Realizing that Morgana had finally awakened, Lionel asked if he could at least be given a break. Morgana replied that young ones should struggle more. As Zagan prepared to attack her, Lionel rushed in and slashed at him. Zagan, using his power, blocked Lionel's strike, and Morgana sensed that it was disintegrated. Leo wondered if this was the spirit magic from the report, and apologized to herself for not realizing sooner that it was useless. As Zagan was about to strike again, Lionel punched him, but Zagan stepped back, telling him to keep Lionel under control. Zagan landed a hit on Lionel, sending him crashing out of the house. Morgana, observing Zagan's moves, wondered if his ability could nullify all magic, allowing him to avoid any attacks. She questioned whether this was a special technique or if there was some kind of prerequisite for it. Morgana considered striking him with magic at close range, hoping that the lack of time to react would make her attack more effective. She then made the lake water swell to enormous proportions, preparing to unleash it upon them. Outside, Leo realized that Morgana was aiming directly at him from beneath the ground, but he wasn't worried as he used his power to defend. He thought that if it didn't work, she would have no choice but to use her trump card. Morgana raised the water even higher, planning to wrap him in it and swallow both of them. Leo, sensing her intentions, commented that it was overdoing things, but it wasn't a bad plan. He used his power to strike the water, blasting it away and causing it to rain down in torrents. He remarked that he had trained a bit as well. Morgana, impressed, wondered if he was using long-range magic combined with disintegration. Leo confirmed, asking if that would be enough as a souvenir for the underworld. With that, he prepared to attack, stating that his mission was complete. But before he could strike, Setsuna suddenly rushed in, delivering a punch. Morgana understood immediately. Setsuna had defeated the spirit. Lionel observed Setsuna, who was surrounded by intense flames but skillfully controlled them, ensuring they didn't spread to the forest. Zagan, noticing Setsuna, mentioned that he was different from Leo. Blazer wondered if they were opponents worth burning, considering the situation. Setsuna, with determination, stated that they were strong opponents, but he didn't need to lower his guard. Blazer reflected on their earlier match, acknowledging that Setsuna had won, but with his humble attitude, which didn't seem to suit him. Setsuna reminded Blazer of their battle in the spirit world, where Blazer had punched him, sending him staggering back. Both of them were exhausted, and Blazer admired Setsuna's incredible willpower. He noticed that despite trembling, Setsuna continued to smile. Even though Setsuna's face was showing signs of strain, he remained resolute, believing he would win. Blazer, preparing to attack, remarked that Setsuna had remarkable confidence for such a weak human. Setsuna commented that Blazer was indeed strong, which explained his undefeated record, but that very strength was also his weakness. Bahabu commented that Blazer was indeed strong, which explained his undefeated record, but that very strength was also his weakness. Blazer wondered what Setsuna was talking about, and Setsuna explained that he had faced defeat and despair many times in the past. However, having hit rock bottom, he now knew how to rise again. No matter how hard things got, his spirit wouldn't break and his willpower would lead him to victory. He was ready to strike, declaring that this would be Blazer's first defeat. Blazer, rising to his feet, declared that it would be Setsuna's last defeat. With all their power, they clashed. After some time, Blazer marveled at Setsuna's strength, admitting that Setsuna had surpassed his expectations. Now he acknowledged that Setsuna had won, though he wondered when Setsuna had become so strong to the point of certain victory. Setsuna replied that in the midst of battle, he had felt his willpower swelling, and the intensity of Blazer's resolve felt like a blazing fire, which began to flow into him. Blazer realized how it had happened without even realizing it and acknowledged Setsuna as a worthy ally, someone he could entrust his power to. He asked Setsuna to take his hand. They both clasped fists, and Setsuna thanked him for entrusting him with his power. Blazer replied that there was no need for thanks and urged him to go. Setsuna nodded and without further words turned and stood before Zagan. Lionel warned Setsuna to be careful of Zagan's claws. Setsuna replied that they steal the magic power of whatever they touch. He thought to himself that Zagan was the only apostle he had fought before returning, and his authority was the devourer of all. Although Zagan could nullify attack magic, he could absorb the mana of anyone he slashed. Zagan was the most powerful entity to have single-handedly annihilated the Northern Kingdom, a place known for its advanced alchemy equipment, all while stealing their magic power. Zagan, noticing Setsuna's knowledge of his authority, remarked that he didn't know how Setsuna had learned about it, but he wouldn't win against him. Leo, trying to regain his composure, winced in pain and noted that Setsuna was much faster than before. Setsuna was surprised that Leo was still able to stand and wondered if he had reduced the impact with magic integration. Realizing Leo had grown even stronger, Zagan told Leo that he would handle Setsuna and asked him to step back and watch. Leo agreed, stepping back to observe. Setsuna reflected that before returning, he had managed to defeat Zagan by exploiting his advantage in long-range magic. But now Zagan's specialty was in close-range combat, and one hit could be fatal. However, Setsuna had changed as well. He blocked Zagan's attack and landed a side punch, forcing Zagan to step back. But Setsuna didn't stop, he pressed the attack again. Zagan, shocked, declared that it was impossible for Setsuna to be faster than him. Setsuna thought to himself that by combining Blazer's power with his own physical boost, he could move much faster. Lionel realized that Setsuna was now combining close combat techniques with spirit magic, enabling him to move even quicker and land multiple strikes on Zagan. Morgana marveled at how Setsuna could control the range of his fire attacks so precisely in such a short time, a truly impressive feat. Zagan let out a loud roar that created immense pressure on everyone around them. He then taunted Setsuna, saying that cloaking his body in flames was essentially asking to be absorbed. He declared that he could feel the overwhelming power now, as he was the devourer of all things. Setsuna smiled, thinking to himself that he was curious about that as well. Zagan charged at Setsuna, landing a hit on him. However, he did this to get closer to the tree, and as Zagan attacked, Setsuna skillfully dodged. Suddenly, Zagan felt as though his body was burning. He called out to Morgana, asking her to use her water magic on him. His body then froze in place, and he wondered what was happening. Setsuna calmly explained that, as he suspected, Zagan couldn't fully devour the spirit magic. Even if he absorbed it with his power, it was useless if he couldn't properly use it. Instead, it was consuming him from the inside. The spirit power was not something that Zagan or any being like him could easily devour. Zagan shouted at Setsuna, accusing him of doing this on purpose. He then turned to Leo, demanding that he disintegrate the magic inside his body. Leo replied sarcastically, pointing out that Zagan had told him to just watch earlier, and now he was fine with Leo interfering. Leo attacked Zagan, and Zagan was puzzled, wondering what Leo was doing. The attack even hit Morgana in the process. Zagan finally realized that Leo had betrayed them. Leo responded, saying that he prioritized the mission and dealt with Morgana because his former superior was useless. He added that Zagan's keen sense of smell had been useful in locating Morgana, but his beastly nature had become unbearable. Leo had done what needed to be done. Furious, Zagan yelled that he would never forgive Leo and vowed to take them all down with him. For his master's sake, he would kill them all. As Zagan prepared to attack, Setsuna used his spirit flame magic, slashing through the air with an inferno slash. Zagan responded by spitting a stone from his mouth, but it was destroyed in the attack, and Zagan was ultimately killed, his body turning to ashes. Setsuna gazed at the black gemstone left behind, then called out to Leo, but realized he had already escaped. He muttered Leo's name, vowing to remember it. No matter where Leo was, Setsuna would find him and defeat him without mercy the next time they crossed paths. Morgana collapsed, and Setsuna rushed to her side, telling her to hang in there and promising to treat her immediately. However, she explained that the opponent had used disintegration magic, and her body couldn't be saved. Both Lionel and Setsuna were deeply saddened by the news. Morgana, with a faint smile, told them not to be sad. She acknowledged that Setsuna was the close combat mage recognized by the spirit flame, and that she had something to entrust to him. She handed him a tool that contained her spirit, explaining that if he used it, it would be helpful for him to understand the speed of water and the sea. She entrusted it to him. Setsuna, shaken, pleaded with her not to speak, as if she was leaving behind a keepsake. He refused to accept that there was no way to save her. But Morgana had already passed away, and Setsuna gently laid her down, his heart heavy. He whispered to himself that no matter how strong he became, if he couldn't protect those important to him, then what was the point? Lionel approached, trying to console him. He explained that life was uncertain, and no one knew what would happen next. No matter how strong someone was, humans were imperfect. The most important thing was to keep facing challenges without giving up, and as long as they were alive, they should continue to fight. Lionel hoped that Setsuna could understand that. Just then, a girl approached and patted Setsuna on the head. She playfully told him that he had been tricked and warned him not to say things like keepsake because it brought bad luck. To his shock, she declared that she was the real Morgana. Both Setsuna and Lionel were stunned. Morgana explained that the old woman he had seen before was actually an alchemical doll, just like the other servants. However, unlike the others, Morgana had embedded her soul into the doll, which was why all of her emotions and powers resided in that old woman. She teased Setsuna, calling him a fool and saying that it was simply a matter of experience. Lionel, still in disbelief, wondered if the old woman was just a decoy. Morgana confirmed that she was, mentioning that the old woman was the masterpiece of the alchemist. She asked if everyone was surprised by the revelation. Setsuna, still trying to process everything, admitted he had never seen a doll so lifelike. He remembered that even in the spirit world, she had appeared as the old woman. Morgana replied that in the spirit world, appearances could be changed at will. Lionel asked that wasn't it a bit much to say that she was Morgana. Morgana revealed her pointed ears, confirming that she was indeed an elf. She explained that elves had lifespans that were much longer than humans, and she asked Setsuna to guess her age. Lionel turned to Setsuna, asking him to give it a try as he was good at that sort of thing. Setsuna, however, immediately refused, knowing it was a trap. There was no right answer to the question. Morgana laughed and revealed the correct answer. She was 300 years old. Setsuna remarked that they didn't answer in digits, then asked if that meant she had also been involved in the Great Magic War. Morgana smiled, asking if he was interested in the war. She said she could tell him about it, but it would come at price. Setsuna, always ready for information, said he had some money to offer. Morgana chuckled, telling him not to take it so seriously. She assured him it wasn't about money, that it wasn't safe to talk there. She suggested they move to the lake where they could discuss the erased history in peace. As they reached the lake, Morgana picked up a stone and threw it into the water. She attempted to jump across, but on her third attempt, the stone sank, and she was frustrated that she hadn't broken the 9-year record. Setsuna turned to Lionel and asked if he was the only one who couldn't keep up with her. Lionel replied that he was in the same position. He speculated that Morgana must have been under a lot of stress. Morgana sighed and suggested they get back to the story of the Great War. She explained that, as they knew, the world was inhabited by various races: humans, dwarves, beastmen, and others. Among them, the elves had lifespans that could be considered eternal. The elves prefer living in nature and often had the opportunity to interact with spirits. This connection allowed them to master spirit magic. The elves and spirits, sometimes revered by humans, were not always seen in a positive light. Some deviated from their paths while being worshipped. One such elf manipulated the king of a nation that worshipped him, teaching spirit magic to those who followed him. This elf waged a war to conquer the world. Setsuna wondered if this was the Great Magic War. Lionel added that the combination of blind faith and power could be incredibly dangerous. Morgana continued, explaining that after many sacrifices on both sides, the followers of the elves and spirits were defeated. Since then, elves have been persecuted as beings who disrupted people's minds. Setsuna realized that the term ancient magic had been coined to conceal the fact that there was magic capable of handling spirits. Morgana confirmed this and explained that was the reason for the term. Lionel, still processing everything, asked Morgana if she resented humans for what they had done to the elves. She replied that she once did, but no longer. Lionel was curious if she still held any resentment. Morgana nodded, saying that while she no longer resented humans, she still kept her distance from them. Since the Great War, there were still those who sought the lives of elves. Even after 200 years, the legacy of hatred remained. That was why she used a double identity to hide her true form. Setsuna asked why she had revealed her real self to them. Morgana explained that it was because Dan had trusted Setsuna, and Setsuna had proven he deserved that trust. Moreover, she had seen him cry, and she felt it was time to show her true self. Setsuna quickly corrected her, saying that he hadn't cried. He reflected on the Great Magic War, thinking that the elves had used spirit magic and succeeded in defeating one of the apostles. However, the great power that came with that responsibility required the use of forbidden magic, which led to many sacrifices. The three of them then began restoring and clearing the forest, repairing the damage they had caused. After everything was completed, it was time for them to part ways. Morgana thanked them for cleaning up the area. Setsuna responded with gratitude, saying he was glad to have met her. Lionel then asked what her plans were after this. She replied that since her whereabouts had been discovered, she would have to hide somewhere else, and they would probably never meet again. Setsuna called out to her, asking that when humanity was in danger, could he call on her power? He bowed and humbly requested her help. Morgana replied that he was being too pushy, but when the time came, he should just ask Dan. She occasionally exchanged letters with him. Setsuna thanked her for that. Suddenly, Blazer appeared, mockingly telling Morgana not to think she could get away with a little sparring and that next time, he would burn her to ashes. Morgana waved a bit of water in front of him, asking if Blazer wanted to get drenched again. He simply turned his face, and they parted ways, each waving a hand as they went in different directions. Setsuna mounted his lizard, remembering a rainy day from his past when he had been outside a building. A woman had come to him with an umbrella and towel, telling him that just because Setsuna had gained great power, it didn't mean he had become a strong person. Confused, he had asked her to explain, and she had told him that great powers sometimes drove people crazy. It was much more important to use power correctly, without arrogance and without being controlled by it, and merely increasing one's strength. Now, as Setsuna rode away, he realized he understood the meaning of that woman's words. He was determined to use the power of the spirits wisely and for the sake of justice. With Lionel by his side, they headed back to the academy. The scene shifted to Satan and Puka. Satan told Puka that they were ready and should begin. Leo was standing there, and Puka remarked that he had failed to kill Setsuna and had even thrown away his comrade. Wasn't that a neglect of duty? Leo denied it, asking Puka to spare him, explaining that he had completed the mission to kill Morgana. Satan asked if Leo had checked to confirm Morgana's death. Leo hesitated, admitting that with the level of attack, Morgana was surely dead. Satan glared at him and sternly reminded Leo that he was ordered to ensure Morgana's death, not of Setsuna. He added that Leo should at least bring back Zagan's body. If he had, at least they recovered it. Satan might have been able to make an undead creature capable of using Zagan's power. Leo explained that Setsuna had knowledge of Zagan's power, which hadn't been in the original information. Satan replied that this didn't excuse his failure, and that they needed to reassess their understanding of Setsuna. He believed Setsuna was hiding something. Puka, intrigued, wondered if Leo's undead toy had been destroyed as well. He then recognized a figure in the distance, Giovanni. Satan called out to Tsukuyomi, asking if she could handle the situation. She replied that she didn't have any other choice. It was almost the right time. Tsukuyomi, 8th Apostle, had the power to revive the dead. Setsuna with Lionel were traveling under a beautiful sky. Lionel mentioned that they were about half a day away from the academy. Setsuna wondered how everyone was doing. Lionel, concerned, remarked that Drago was probably training excessively, and Setsuna agreed, wondering when he had started caring about those around him. Lionel asked if things were different before. Setsuna agreed, saying that he had only focused on training himself. He believed that by pursuing the pinnacle of long-range magic, he could win every battle on his own without needing anyone's help. Those around him only served as encouragement, and he had few friends. However, things were different now. He had reliable comrades with him. Furthermore, he had learned that there were various forms of strength in other magical systems beyond just long-range magic. The magic control he had cultivated before his return also proved useful for close combat. Lionel explained that magic control was a skill mastered through training, not just talent or aptitude. He believed that Setsuna's level of mastery wasn't something he achieved in just a few years. He thought that Setsuna had likely undergone years of rigorous training, which explained why he had become the strongest in the world. Lionel speculated that Setsuna must have had an unimaginable past. After a while, they stopped to take a break, and Setsuna took out the items he had received from Morgana. He read a note and understood that it would certainly be helpful, deciding to use it when the time came. Blazer was examining the necklace, mentioning that he could sense the presence of a water spirit. Setsuna knew that Morgana had given him the necklace to establish contact with the water spirit. He focused, calling out to the spirit, wondering if she could hear his voice. Just then, the locket called his name. Surprised, Setsuna was told not to be shocked, as the spirit had been watching all along with Morgana. The spirit explained that if Setsuna could overcome her trial, she would gladly lend him her power. Setsuna wondered if it was real, but the spirit reminded him not to celebrate just yet. The trial would surely take place in battle, which reminded him of the upcoming battle with Blazer. The water spirit reassured him that he didn't need to be tense, as her trial was meant to challenge him and help him grow. Setsuna wondered what he needed to move. The spirit explained that she was growing tired of the spiritual world and wanted to experience a new perspective. Blazer, surprised, remarked on how lenient the spirit was, adding that it was typical for him not to get along with her. The spirit responded that she didn't dislike Blazer at all. Setsuna thought it was fine that, unlike Blazer, the spirit was friendly, but he still wondered what she meant by moving someone. Lionel placed his hand on Setsuna's shoulder, telling him that he was really lucky. He then said that, to be honest, he had a great story that would move Setsuna, a tale of fiery friendship that would bring tears to their eyes. The spirit wondered about this old story. Lionel nodded and began explaining that it was about the heroes who saved the country decades ago. Arduino, the indestructible blade, and Wallace, the iron walls. A great story indeed. As Lionel continued telling the story, it turned into morning and Setsuna had fallen asleep. When he woke up, he saw that Lionel was still talking to the water spirit. Setsuna decided to discuss the matter once they returned to the academy. Back at the academy, Setsuna was talking with Carol, Drago, and Layla. Layla wondered about something that had moved, and Drago asked Setsuna if anything had happened during the break. Setsuna explained that it had been just a bit of training. Layla then suggested they visit an art museum together next time, mentioning that she had a friend who knew a lot about art. Setsuna agreed, saying that it would surely be helpful. Drago asked if they should all join, and Carol agreed, saying, "Just leave it to me." Later, they all arrived at the museum to explore. Afterward, as they were heading back, Setsuna returned to Drago, and Drago removed his t-shirt to show off his body. Carol, in turn, unleashed her inferno, displaying its power. Even Blazer didn't step back and showed off his own powers. Setsuna, however, was still concerned about the water spirit. The scene shifted to Setsuna training under the world tree. While working on his reflexes, Blazer remarked that Setsuna had mastered his power to the point where it was almost like having a partner. He had surpassed the human limit so quickly. Setsuna replied he never thought he would hear such words from Blazer. He assured him that there was no need to worry, as the new technique seemed almost complete. As Setsuna looked around, he noticed the snow, realizing that winter had already arrived. He thought to himself that the time of the incident was approaching and he still hadn't made the contract with the water spirit. Packing his things, Setsuna muttered that they should put the trial on hold for a while since he had something else to do. Blazer asked if he was sure he was done with the training. Setsuna replied that the timing was right, but he couldn't ignore the power of the sacred tree any longer. They had used a vast amount of mana in their training, and it would take a few years to recharge. Setsuna bowed toward the tree, thanking it for helping him master Blazer's power so well. With the end of the year approaching, Setsuna realized there was no time to rest. Blazer wondered if this meant a big battle was coming. Setsuna confirmed, explaining that before returning, the humidity had been defeated by the Eagle God, and there were 4 main causes behind the defeat. One of these would occur in the next 7 days. Blazer asked what the 4 great causes of defeat were. Setsuna replied that among the invasions by the Evil God, there were 4 particularly fatal events: the Great Pledge of the Dragon's Silence, the destruction of the Maga's army, the overnight disappearance of the royal capital, and the army of the underworlds starting to move within 7 days. Additionally, the sudden appearance of a massive number of undead caused both the Maga's party and civilians to suffer great losses. Laser asked if undead were not considered much of a threat. Bahat replied that they would not be if they were just regular undead. However, the enemy undead were once heroes who had been greatly respected and admired worldwide. He suspected that a powerful force was behind this transformation, turning the dead into these special undead. Initially, he thought Giovanni might be the apostle behind it, but he found it hard to believe that Giovanni had enough power to command the army of the underworld. The incident that was set to take place in a few days was a grave robbery in Eldon, Setsuna's hometown, where bodies were taken from the graves of heroes. It was believed that the heroes' treasures were the original target. Laser added that the actual goal was the corpses themselves. Setsuna stated that he would head to the royal cemetery before the night of the incident to prevent it. While they were having a meal with friends, Layla asked Drago if he was going home during the winter break. Drago agreed, explaining that his father was going to teach him the secret techniques of close combat, passed down through generations. Carol said she would be playing with Fenrir in the ice plains on her family's territory and asked if Laser would join her. Laser declined. Layla was amazed to hear that Carol's family owned territory, and she couldn't even imagine it. Layla then asked Setsuna how he planned to spend his time. He appeared deep in thought, and when she called out to him again, he seemed surprised, asking what they were talking about. Layla thought he had become lost in thought again and wondered if he was hiding something dangerous from them that he couldn't share. Just then, Carol leaned closer to Layla and told her that Setsuna had secret popularity among the girls, and if Layla didn't make a move soon, she might lose him. Layla denied it, saying that wasn't the case. Carol assured Layla she didn't need to hide it. Layla then asked Setsuna where he was from. He replied that he was from an orphanage in the Eldina region. Layla mentioned that it was very close to her family's inn. Carl, who had been listening, interrupted and mentioned that her family ran an inn. Setsuna asked who he was. Carl, irritated, responded that he was Carl the Noble. Then Carl invited Layla to join his salon, promising